Well, still then.
Not us.
Well, it's not. But
Are they tearing up your land?
they just made and they brought the food all again. And they threw one chunk past my front door.
Yep. Yeah, I just, everybody. Don't leave your kids swords. Oh, yeah.
Really?
There's no question. If because Tommy is
Evidently,
if I wanted to just make a change.
Are you going to say anything, or am I going to say
no,
something?
I'm not going to say. I just wanted to I'm not done with arguing.
The only people that shake their
What do is yeah, do a minute.
See if I can get them to make me happy.
You know what Jack Park is?
Okay, I'll make a note of that and keep that in line, and then we'll check on it
Got a few more
and
shit.
make sure. But I'll check with.
Make a couple more changes. But as long as
She's not in high school.
Well, it's
Probably middle school.
if you have
based on a right-of-way thing. It really shouldn't be. It should be if you go in there and you tear that up and you fix it
Yeah, right.
and take care of it.
One of my friends, they got his went into a pasture and let everything run.
David, what do you say? Hey, I said a prayer for you.
Okay. Let me see.
Okay.
Let me check on it and see what.
I looked around there. You were the only council person that wasn't there, so I said a prayer.
Where was that?
Prayer break.
I was the only one not there. I actually was thinking about going there.
No, I don't think
I stayed up
that's
so late.
right. I don't think that's right. I think he's stretching
You're probably up by
there a little bit.
Oh, okay.
We actually
I'm getting old.
Right.
Old people.
On trimming.
I get a 4:35. Usually go up about, I reach from 9 to 10. Usually fall asleep about 9.
7 hours.
Yeah, I get this.
Well, now Intercounty needs to be reciprocal to people that live along that area to take care of it and clean it up.
Well, yeah, well, so far he's been working.
Okay.
They pulled him off the road in the grass and started running about where I had
You guys look sharp.
and they brought dirt in and filled the car.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is
Let me know. Keep me impressed. Keep me.
I'll leave it the same.
Okay.
I'm gonna put it on the desktop.
I'm gonna write you out and get you, buddy.
It will be open at the bottom.
Good.
If we have to address it. And I'll move the mics back from you. Here's your flash drive. Now what you'll have to do is it's a 2-screen system.
Are you ready?
It's not.
I'm good, thank you, sir.
It's easy thing to do. So if you hit F5, it's going to move to this screen. Okay? If you move it, you have to make sure it's moving on this screen because if it doesn't, they can't see you here. And the TV can't see you when the TV opens. So that's all that you have to do. And I think you're the one. See how far that's with the audit?
It's up at the next one. So up at the next one. Zoning, so I'm happy.
Okay, so you're the second presentation after the audit. So I'm going to leave it here. It's at the bottom. So, yep, F5 gets there. F5, yeah.
But I guess Steve. Oh, you need 10? Okay. That's why I have to make these first. If you need that. I like to have options. The ones that bleed on me, the ones that will not. You like marking in red? I got you, Pam.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yeah, that's
Oh my gosh.
which Kool-Aid?
The wife would say Kool-Aid.
That's not good, right?
Huh?
That's not a good thing, right?
No, it works great.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't buy that.
They're run by the
They aren't. Monsanto's not.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our May 6th meeting. Pastor Whitmire, would you lead us in a prayer?
Let's pray. Our gracious God, we thank you tonight for your goodness. We thank you for these elected officials, and we're grateful for them in our city. Father, we recognize our knowledge, but Father, we in comparison are limited. We ask you tonight, Father, for knowledge that would come from you. Thank you for the scripture. Thank you for what it brings to our hearts and our minds as our hearts and minds are renewed by it. Bless this meeting tonight, we pray, with your presence. And it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. I'd like to open the meeting with a pledge. We have some young gentlemen from Troop 85. Would you lead us in the pledge?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Consider approval of the city council meetings from April 1st and 15th. Any questions?
Then again to be approved, sir?
Second.
Motion made in second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? There are no public hearings tonight. We have several special presentations. The first one is by Tammy Alsop from our auditors to give us a recap on 2018. Tammy?
Hello, thank you, Mayor. My name's Tammy Alsop. I'm the lead partner on the audit for the city of Rolla. So I appreciate you letting me present the financial statements. Please don't hesitate to ask me any questions that you'd like to ask. First of all, this year you only received one report. So you received the one report this year. You didn't have over $750,000 in federal expenditures, so we did not have to do a single audit or federal boards audit. So that's why you just have the one report this year. We'll go over this report just a little bit. The first report is our independent auditor's report, and this is our report on the financial statements. And on page 2, this gives you where our opinion is. Under opinions, it says, in our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects the respective financial position of the governmental activities, the business type activities, the discretely presented component unit, and each major fund of the city as of September 30th, 2018, and the respective changes in financial position and, where applicable, cash flows thereof for the year then ended in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. So that is what we call unmodified opinion. That's the highest form of assurance that an entity can receive on their financial statements. So, and it used to be called unqualified. Now it's called unmodified. So it's the same thing. If you hear somebody say unqualified opinion, that's what it used to be called. It's the same thing as unmodified. They just thought the word unmodified was a little clearer to people. Starting on page 3, management discussion and analysis. This gives you a short synopsis of what happened in the city during the year. So if you want to read a short synopsis, you can read these pages. It's probably about 10 pages long. it really focuses on the government-wide financial statements, though. And the government-wide financial statements gives you all the capital assets of the city, all the debt of the city, all the net pension asset of the city, the net pension obligation of the city. So it gives you all that. So just like you are a for-profit entity. So that's kind of what this management discussion analysis focuses on. So you'll see where it talks about in these bullet points, the net position of the city's governmental activities decreased by $870,000 for the year as a result of current year activities. And the net position of the city's business type activities increased $51,000. So then you'll notice the assets and deferred outflows of resources of the city exceeded its liabilities and deferred inflows of resources as of September 30th by $100 million. And that's down from $105 million in the prior fiscal year. And it didn't really decrease. Well, it did decrease, but because of GASB 75, that's a new pronouncement that we had to put on the books this year. They wanted your OPEB liability on the books. So the other post-employment benefits. So this is anybody who receives the health insurance after they've actually retired, and then before they get on Medicare. So this was actually approximately, I think, $5 million for the city. So that's where that decrease actually came in. And so that was a new pronouncement that came in that we had to adopt in 2018. And that is just a government-wide liability. That is not a fund statement liability. And what you're used to seeing is fund statement assets and liabilities, and that's on the modified accrual basis. But the total value of your new construction in fiscal year 2018 was $29 million, compared to $67 million, in 2017. And then you'll see where the city sales tax rate of 2.25 and how that's distributed out. And then the next to last bullet point, the fiscal year 2018 completes the 16th full year of operations at the center. And that's Recreation Center. And revenue, so it generated revenues of $1.2 million, and it had operating expenditures of $1.3 million. And at the close of the current fiscal year, the city's governmental funds reported combined fund balances of $8.4 million. At the end of the current fiscal year, unassigned fund balance for the general fund was $2 million. And then if you go on to page 6, this gives you a short synopsis, a little more detailed information between the governmental activities and the business type activities. So that you'll see that we have total assets, and this is the governmental funds and the business type, of $127 million. So this includes all the infrastructure of the city, all the buildings and everything, and the new fire truck. That's on here. So I was glad they brought it. They brought it so I could see it. Thought that was nice. I'm sure they didn't bring it just for me. But that was nice. I got to see it, wasn't it? The deferred outflows of resources, $997,000, and again, that has to do with your net pension your net pension asset for loggers. Then you have total liabilities of $25.5 million. Then you had deferred inflows of resources of $2 million. Then you had a net position of almost $100 million. And then on page 7, this gives you the revenues and the expenses of the city. So you'll notice you have charges for services of $13.9 million, of $21 million for the governmental funds and the business type activities. Now, these charges for services is what you would charge directly for the service that you would get, such as at the center, at the rec center. So if you have memberships and things like that, that's exactly what you get the charges for services for, and that's what this is. and on your sewer fund. So you would have sewer fees, and that's where this comes from. Then your operating grants and contributions, $353,000. These are contributions that you get from other grants that are for operating activities, such as you might get overtime grants for your police, for them doing some overtime. And so that's where that would be. Then you have capital grants and contributions of $51,000, which is down from last year of $912,000. And this is capital grants, and this is for capital grants and contributions, and this is what we've had in the past. We've had road grants, so you've had grants, like 80% grants that would help us pay for the roads, and those roads would be capitalized. So that's why it's called capital grants and contributions, or part of it was for the airport. I know we've done the airport in the past through some of these grants. Then you have your general revenues, which take care of helping pay all the other expenditures, because they do not match anything specifically. So you have your property taxes and your sales taxes. Your property tax is $1.2 million. Your sales tax is $9.5 million. And then, so that leaves you in total revenues of $36 million. Then you have your expenses, and it's broken down by department, such as the general government, public safety, and public works. And then you have the airport, and then for your business type activities, it's broken down between sewer and environmental services. So you'll see that your largest expenses there were public works and maintenance of $14.2 million. So you had total expenses of $36.9 million. So that leaves you with excess before transfers, and that would be a negative $818,000. And then, as I said before, down there you have the restatement of the $4 million, and again, that's for your OPEB liability. On page 8, tells you a little bit more about, talks a little bit more about the fund base, the government-wide basis, and then down at the bottom, starting on page 8, it talks about the governmental funds. And again, this is what you're used to seeing as the governmental funds. So you'll notice the general fund balance was $3.6 million. And that increased by $338,000 or 10% from the prior year. And then it goes on to talk about the street fund. So it really talks about all the major funds and how they increased and decreased during the year. And then over on page 10, talks about your capital assets and the change in your capital assets. And then on the bottom of page 10, it talks about your long-term debt. Your long-term debt actually went down. It went from $15.4 million down to $14.5. Even though we put on the lease for the new fire truck, we had we did pay down our obligations like we were supposed to. So our debt actually did get decreased then. And then you have your budget to actual, some highlights there. Over on page 13, this is your statement of net position. This is your statement of net position actually broken out in total. And then you have your component unit on the side there, which is Rolla Municipal Utilities. And then over on page 14 is more detailed information on your statement of activities. And then on page 15, this is your balance sheet for your governmental funds. I like to focus on the general fund because that's what you normally can use the money for. So you have total assets of $4.8 million. Then you had total liabilities of $1.1 million. So that left the total fund balance for the general fund of $3.6 million. And you'll see down there you have unassigned fund balance of $2 million of that $3.6 million. Then over on the next page, on page 16, this gives you a reconciliation between the fund statements and the government-wide statements. Such as you take your fund statement, fund balance, and then you add back your capital assets. You subtract out your debt and your OPEB obligations. and then you add back your internal service fund, and that gives you the total net position of your governmental, the statement of net position. Then on page 17, this is your statement of revenues and expenditures and changes in fund balance. So in the general fund, you had total revenues of almost $11 million. Then you had total expenditures of $12.8 million. So you had expenditures over revenues of $1.8 million. Then you had your capital lease of $1.3 million. Transfers in of $1 million. So that left you a positive change in your fund balance of $338,000 for the general fund. And then again, over on page 18, this gives you a reconciliation between your fund statements and your government-wide statements. Then on page 17 is the statement of net position for your proprietary funds, for your sewer and environmental funds. And then also your internal service fund. And page 20 gives your statements of expenses and changes in net position for your proprietary funds. No real large changes there. And then on page 21 is your statement of cash flows for the proprietary funds. This statement actually tells you how your money came in during the year and how you paid it out during the year, such as you received money from your customers, and then you paid it out to your employees and suppliers. You also purchased capital assets. You paid down debt, and then interest, and then you had some maturity of investments. So that's how you come out to the increase, decrease in your cash and cash equivalents. On page 23 starts the notes to the financial statements. Note A is a summary of significant accounting policies. Nothing really changed in that note this year. Nothing new. No, there will be something that comes on page 28. Down at the bottom, it talks about interest capitalization. There is a new GASB that's coming out that we don't have to capitalize interest anymore on debt that is for capital assets. So that'll be something that just goes away. Then over on page 31, if you have bank balances over the FDIC limit, you have to have them insured or collateralized with investments. And as of September 30, 2018, the bank balances were entirely secured or collateralized with securities held by the city or its agent in the city's name. So you always like to see that. Always like to look for that and make sure that that's always okay. Not a lot of changes in your financial statements this year. Just trying to show you any big differences. Your debt goes on for a long time, so I won't look at that too hard. It goes for page 34, and it goes for a while. But you're paying down all your debt like you're supposed to. So I didn't see any problems there. You're also in accordance with your debt covenants, so there's no problem there. We always test the debt covenants to make sure you're always in compliance. You have to make sure that everything's up on the Emma website. There was also some new requirements that came in on February 28, 2019, that any bonds that were issued after February 28, 2019 will be required to more requirements for Emma, and I don't think that's going to be a problem. It's usually what you see on the Emma's website, and that's a national repository is Emma. That's where you have to post your bonds and any material changes or anything like that. So they just want all that information posted and them to be able to see all that information. But if you go to issue bonds, they'll tell you exactly what they want on there. So anytime you have a question, you contact that bond attorney. They'll tell you exactly what you need to put on there. Then on page 43 is the capital assets. No real change in that. Page 46 starts your pension information, and that's your loggers. So if you look on the bottom of page 48, this is your net pension, what I talked about before, your net pension asset. So So you'll see down at the bottom of the page, you went from a net pension asset of 2.8 million to a pension asset of 4.9 million. Now, this doesn't mean if you get out of it, you get that money, of course. This just means that hopefully your rate will go down with loggers. Hopefully you'll see that with the change in the net pension asset liability. Let's see. And then you have RMU's pension information. And then starting on page, note, oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry. Trying to find your new, here it is, okay, on page 58. Sorry about that. Note M. This is the new note on the post-employment benefit, post-employment benefits other than pensions. And you notice this looks a lot like the pension footnote. So they put the schedule over on page 59 if you want to see the schedule where it starts with your OPEB liability, begin with of the $5.6 million at September 30, 2017. Then they added the service cost and the interest, subtracted out the assumption changes and the benefit payments to come down to the balance at September 30 of the $5.7 million OPEB liability. So that's where we get that OPEB liability, and that's all actuarially done, determined. So, otherwise, that's the only change really in your financial statements. There's budget to actual information in the back, which is always good information to look at. But I think everything looked good. I had no management letter comments, and that's good. I think that's really good. I think Stephanie does a good job. I do appreciate all her help and all her work. So I do appreciate all the staff that helps us.
Thank you, Tammy. Any questions from council? That's a lot to digest. Someone must have a question. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We would like to officially accept the audit results. So is there a motion to accept? Motion made, is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Thank you. Next presentation is by Miss Laura Gebler from the Phelps County Industrial Solutions.
Thank you, Mayor. All right, okay. Figuring out all the technology. Well, first off, thank you all for allowing me to speak on behalf of Phelps County Industrial Solutions tonight. My name is Laura Giebler. I'm the Executive Director with PCIS since September 2018. As I've been getting to know others in the Rolla community, I have learned more often than not that when I discuss where I work and our mission, most do not recognize the company by its new name, and I thank you for allowing me to be here and reintroduce this organization to Rolla because it is very special to me, and I hope you will soon learn how special it is to the community. So Phelps County Industrial Solutions is formerly known as the Rolla Area Sheltered Workshop and has been involved in the Rolla community since 1970 under the idea to help those who can help themselves with a little help. And next year, we will celebrate our 50th anniversary, and we are very excited about that. Although our name has changed in 2017, our mission remains the same: to provide meaningful employment to people with disabilities. Our goal is to enhance the quality of life for people we serve through vocational growth and experience and community inclusion. Shelter workshops, especially in the state of Missouri, bring an interesting mix of business and mission to their local communities. Essentially, our business and our mission must work together to aid each other. PCIS and other sheltered workshops work to enhance job skills with our employees by completing work and jobs for businesses in our surrounding areas. Essentially, our ability to build vocational skills relies on doing valuable work and viable work with our customers. And the variety of skills of the employees aids businesses in the completion of the work and the quality of work. I want to introduce you to a little bit of my background, and this is a picture that I have of my family.
so you get to know a little bit about me and where I have come from as a business leader in Rolla. My experience with shelter workshops goes back several years with a significant impact of two very special people. I am blessed with my brother, who is 8 years my senior, who has autism. And Jake has worked for a shelter workshop called Impact Group in Franklin County in Sullivan, and he will celebrate 20 years of employment with Impact next year. He has taught me that the way to work with an individual with a disability in employment is to have expectations, yet patience. My brother is an adult and wants to be treated as such. The key to working with Jake is not to hold his hand and do the work for him. We teach him and allow him to learn the process steps. There's no degradation in this process to assisting Jake. He has learned, like the rest of us, to do a job with a standard that he has set for himself, and he takes pride in his work. The other influence in my experience with shelter workshops affected me long before I knew what my future had in store for me. My father became the general manager turned CEO of Impact Group over 27 years ago, so most of my life I have been around shelter workshops. My dad has taught me that every person we work with deserves to be treated just like an adult and an individual with their own needs. Just like you and I, we love our work and we love to learn from it. And the sheltered employment environment allows us to meet people at their individual needs, just like we want to be. Our employees and our customers depend on us to be creative with the work that we bring into our facility, as well as the work we do out in the community. And my dad has also introduced me to several other shelter workshop managers, directors, whose mentorship I have cherished, and hoping to utilize that mentorship as we continue to grow with PCIS. I say all of this to show that although I am new to the Rolla business area, I have some background in the field, and I continue to learn and educate myself with the regulations, business practices, and policies. And that will continue to not only increase my knowledge, but lend itself to Phelps County Industrial Solutions. I truly believe in the community's right to know the background of the business leaders in their area. I am so very blessed to be involved with such a great organization. PCIS employs approximately 60 people with disabilities, and in 2018, PCIS provided over 68,000 hours of employment to our employees. Some of our current work and job skills utilized range from product assembly and cardboard recycling, janitorial, product cleaning, inspection, pallet jack, machine operating, baling, and we have two buildings. We have our main building at 3900 High Point Boulevard. If you just go off of exit 189 behind the Loves and Hartman, you will find us. And right next door, we have a great warehouse and a cross-stocking facility that we hope to continue to fix up and eventually use for more office and production space for our people so we can hire more and continue to impact more people in Rolla and Phelps County. PCIS is always looking for potential partnerships in many areas, and our employees enjoy new work. Let me tell you how excited they are when we get a new job, and because they want to learn new skills. And along with our present employees, new partnerships as well, continuing customers allow us to expand to assist more people with disabilities in our county with employment growth. And it is my personal goal to assist every employee at PCIS in learning at least one new job skill that will assist in more independence for that individual. If one employee can find a job in the community with the credible and viable vocational skills that they learned from a shelter workshop, like Phelps County Industrial Solutions, then I feel that I and the rest of the staff have done our job. And truly, this might sound a little odd, but I would love to be without a job. And I mean that, and that I wish that all of my employees would be able to find a job in the community. However, the reality is there are some individuals that without a shelter workshop would most likely be in a home or day program. And a shelter workshop allows our employees a place to be and a place to learn, a place to grow, and more importantly, a place to excel. If you would like to ever have a tour, please reach out to us because we would love to have anybody in the community come out and meet the best employees in Rolla. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that. I was there a couple of years on the tour, and the work ethic and the enthusiasm was tremendous. It really was. You can see it in their faces.
They love their work.
I have a question.
Yes.
The work that is done, does it have to be done there, or could folks work off-site? So if a small business person has somebody,
We actually do a variety of work out in the community. We do a lot of janitorial services for a lot of different organizations within Rolla. We like to have both in-house work and out-of-house work because it kind of assists with the variety of individuals with disabilities that we have. We have some that may not be able to be very mobile, a lot of people with walkers and wheelchairs, so we need something in-house to be able to do, but we do a lot of janitorial and such out in the community as well, and we have some amazingly skilled individuals that are just wanting to come out and learn and be a part of the community. And you know, being a part of the community and going out in the community really allows their social skills to grow. Because a lot of times, that's all they've got, is coming to work and being able to go out. Beyond that, they might be in their home with the same people that they're going to work with, and then going home to the same people. So to be able to interact in the community is great for them. So we accept any type of partnership.
that's great, thank you. Councilpersons? David?
I just want to say thank you for all you do. It's great to have you in our community, and hopefully we can continue to have great partnerships with you in the future. So thanks for all you guys do.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Laura, I want to thank you too. My son has been employed at the workshop for, I guess, about 8 years now. He's tried a couple of times he's gotten jobs out in the community at the hospital and at break time, but due to his organizational skills and his impulsivity, he was not able to maintain the job because of the stress that he felt got under. And so the workshop is home for him, and he does very well there.
If I may brag on him for a minute, he did get to come to Jeff City with us to advocate for a choice in employment. A lot of times shelter workshops seem to be a place that people seem to think that we want to take away that option of choice whenever we want to send them out into competitive employment and have no other option but sheltered employment for these guys. So they went out to advocate for their choice in job, whether it's competitive, whether it's shelter workshop, and he was one that got to come with us, and that was exciting. So we really love the work that we do, and we really love the community of Rolla. And I didn't realize how special this community was till I was able to come here, and y'all are amazing, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before our next presentation, I don't want to assume that the public has a look-see at what the rest of the agenda is, but tonight we're going to talk about two topics related to marijuana. The first one is Amendment 2, which in November of 2008 passed at the state level, and the state pretty much defines the regulations as to anything and everything associated with it. However, local communities can have some input on the time, place, and manner of disposition of the medical marijuana without creating a burden. So one of the things coming up in the subsequent presentation is to start that process, where we will talk about the specific things that we can impact with respect to that, getting some feedback at the council level, then initiate the more formal process as it goes through planning and zoning, the public hearings, and eventually comes back to the city council. So along that particular vein, we have someone here, Jack Cardetti, that is going to give us a primer, if you will, on Amendment 2.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thanks for allowing me to do this tonight. I'm going to go through just a real quick PowerPoint, talk about a little bit about the law, how it came to be, what the responsibility of local governments are, and then more importantly, take any questions. This is an issue we're working very closely with the Missouri Municipal League on. We've done webinars and others to get them sort of ready for their part of the implementation. So my name's Jack Cardetti. Phelps County is sort of a familiar place to me. I grew up in St. James. My wife is from Rolla. We now live with our 3 kids in Columbia. And I was the general consultant and the spokesman for Amendment 2 last year. Dan Beets, who was on our board, the head of our board actually, is here as well to talk on another topic tonight. So really want to talk about what happens next. In November, Missourians went to the polls and voted overwhelmingly 66% for Amendment 2 to make Missouri the 33rd state to have a medical marijuana program. So the nice thing is we're not inventing this from scratch. 32 other states have a medical marijuana program. They're not all the same, But successful implementation really depends on both the state and the local level being able to take a look at this issue and decide what's best for their communities. I now work for an organization called MoCan Trade, Missouri Medical Cannabis Trade Association, and like I said, we're going throughout the state talking with different cities and working with municipal league to get really information about out about this. So it's important to realize what Amendment 2 does and what it doesn't do, right? This isn't recreational or adult use marijuana. This is medical marijuana. Only people that have a medical marijuana card, which has to be certified by a state licensed physician, will be able to participate in the program. And so Amendment 2 lays out 10 different qualifying conditions: cancer, epilepsy, PTSD, HIV, and others that allow someone to qualify as a patient for Missouri's program. It then also creates some licensing done at the state level through the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services for essentially 3 different types of licenses here. You'll have the cultivation license. There'll be 60 of those statewide that allow medical marijuana to be grown here in the state. There'll be 86 infused product licenses. That's when you take the medical marijuana and form it into edible or oil or a vapor. And then you have what obviously you guys will be dealing with the most is the dispensaries. That'll actually be the only retail location where someone with a medical marijuana card can go and physically access medical marijuana. There'll be 192 of those throughout the state, 24 of those in this congressional district. So if you think about the 8th congressional district, which goes all the way from Rolla up to suburban St. Louis, down to Cape Girardeau, down to the Arkansas border, in that whole region of the state, there'll be 24 dispensaries. If I had to sit here and predict today, I would say Rolla would likely have 1 or 2 dispensaries here. And so what you guys are going to embark on here is a process defined by ordinance. Where do you want those in the city? Where does it make sense? Where does it make sense for patients to access those? Where does it fit in the community? And a lot of cities are going through this process right now. It is important to talk about this. This will be the most highly regulated business in your city. Again, no one gets to open up a dispensary in Rolla, Missouri, unless the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services, someone applies. There'll be 4 or 5 applications for every license, and they actually are selected on that highly competitive basis. Then they'll be able to have a license from the state, and then you'll be able to tell them where in the city essentially you'd like them to operate. This also, the regular sales tax applies here, so it obviously is money that'll come into city government as well. So just like it's important to know what Amendment 2 does, it's important what Amendment 2 doesn't do. This isn't recreational or adult use marijuana. We predict that that in the state of Missouri, after 3 years of implementation, somewhere around 2.5% of Missouri will have a medical marijuana card. So again, the difference between this and any other retail business in the entire city here in Rolla is that 98% of people will never even be able to walk into this facility. The first thing you do when you walk into the facility is you'll have to hand them your medical marijuana card. They'll check that to make sure it's you. They'll also make sure you haven't purchased more than your allotted amount that month before you can ever actually go back to the retail part of it. So the security on this is very tight, cameras everywhere. This will be one of the most highly regulated in the whole state. Also, there'll be a seed-to-sale tracking system. So everything from when the plant goes into the ground in the cultivation facility to where that final sale is made at a dispensary, it will be tracked by the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services. They'll do on-site inspections anytime they want, and if they say that this plant over here should have tag number 798, that's what's in the computer system, it better have that or your license is going to be in peril. So this is a very, very highly regulated system. 32 other states have it. This is what's worked out well there. Also, like we talked about, you won't see one of these on every street corner. Again, in this entire congressional district, there are only going to be 24 of these. A little bit about the timeline. It passed in November. On June 4th, that's when the Missouri Department of Health will make applications available both to patients, but also for those that want to operate one of those 3 facilities. And so that June 4th is a really important date. That's when applications come out. Starting August 3rd, for 2 weeks, between August 3rd and August 17th, that's when the Department of Health will actually accept these applications and then score them blindly by a third party to determine who the best operators are going to be in the state of Missouri and who will actually have those licenses. So what does this have to do with local government? I've talked a lot about the Missouri Department of Health. They're in charge of this program. They have the expertise. They have rules and regulations that they're continuing to put out. But it really does define, in the amendment, there's a specific paragraph that talks about local government's role. What it says is that no medical marijuana facility shall be initially sited within 1,000 feet of a school, church, or a daycare. Local cities, local municipalities cannot ban these facilities. But what they can do is, if in many instances, that 1,000-foot would put whole chunks of the city out of reach for patients. So what this does allow is it allows local governments to come in and reduce that 1,000 feet setback, essentially, if they want to. It also allows the local municipality to set time, place, and manner regulations. Hours of operation, things like that are definitely where cities are taking a look at. So that's local government's role in this. A lot of people, when people are going to apply for these licenses August 3rd, it's not going to be enough to go in and say, I want to put a dispensary in Rolla, Missouri. You're going to have to physically show the state of Missouri, Department of Health, that you have that real estate, you're going to have to list a specific address, show them that you have legal control of that real estate, show them what your specific security plan is going to be to ensure that all of that has to be done by August 3rd when you turn applications in. And that's why cities across Missouri are, during this time frame right now, looking at putting their local ordinances in place. So, like we said, local governments can't ban these, but they can definitely institute ordinances that really regulate time, place, and manner. You'll see a few of these in the city. You won't see them on every street corner, and it will be a highly, highly secure building, and one that 98% of people will never even be able to access. So very different than a lot of your traditional retail. The other thing that's important, dispensaries, or in many ways, they're a medical establishment, like a pharmacy or health care clinic. And so it's our view as an association that when you look at where you would, as a city, allow a pharmacy, healthcare clinic, other of those to operate, that's what you really should be thinking about when it comes to these ordinances and where patient access is going to be important. They're also going to bring in tax revenue, like we said. The Missouri State Auditor projects that these will generate about $6 million annually for local governments across the state and $18 million for the state. You charge the regular state and local sales tax on this, then there's an additional 4% tax that's paid at the sale at dispensaries, medical marijuana. That 4% goes towards veterans and veterans health care in the state of Missouri. And so that is, that's kind of an overview of there. It's also important, what are other cities, like I said, they're going through this process right now. And a lot of them are looking at, is that 1,000-foot setback appropriate or is it not? So these are what some of the other cities are doing. St. Louis has introduced their ordinance. They are turning that 1,000-foot setback all the way down to 0. In St. Louis urban setting, things are very close together. 1,000-foot would essentially put wide swaths of the city out of reach. They're putting that down to 0. Instead, what they're doing is regulating these with land use codes, as you guys are used to it. No city's ever going to allow a medical marijuana facility in a residential area, for instance. But they're going in and looking, does it make sense in commercial? Does it make sense in retail? Does it make sense in light industrial, right? And that's how the city of St. Louis is regulating where these facilities will be. St. Joseph, they're looking at reducing it to 300 feet. Creve Coeur in St. Louis has already passed 300 feet. O'Fallon in St. Charles, Missouri has reduced the setback to 750 feet. Warrensburg passed theirs, leaving it at 1,000 foot. Ellisville in St. Louis is going down to 300. The city of Kirksville has reduced it down to 0. They want to see these in their community. So those are some of the different issues that will be facing you sort of over the next few weeks here as you look at these ordinances. Where do we want these to operate in town? What are the rules that we're going to put around them? What do the hours of operation look like? Knowing that having safe, effective access for patients really should be some of the guiding light. So I want to just walk you through kind of that general discussion of what other cities are looking at right now, but more importantly, answer any questions you have about Amendment 2 or about the city's role in it.
Yeah, I'm curious about why don't pharmacies dispense medical marijuana? I mean, it seems like it would make sense.
Absolutely.
Is there an answer?
And there are a lot of things about medical marijuana programs that don't make sense right off the bat. And it's because of this dichotomy of 33 states, the vast majority of Americans live in a state where medical marijuana is legal, yet on the federal level, it's still illegal, right? And so that's one reason when you get into why aren't pharmacists involved in this? Why can't, if I want to open up a dispensary in Rolla, Missouri, why can't I walk down to the bank, show them a business plan, and get a loan? Well, that's FDIC insured. So it's that tension you have of it being legal in 33 states, but still illegal on the federal level. Now, there's legislation moving at the federal level that are reforming these in many ways, but until that's done, it's also the reason that all of this that I described is going to take place within the borders of Missouri. There can be no interstate commerce. It has to be grown here, it has to be processed in the state of Missouri, it has to be sold in it. Nothing can come in from out of state, and that's because it's still illegal on the federal level.
Jack, I can see a drugstore chain because of that dichotomy, but if there's an independently owned drugstore in Rolla, Missouri, could they be a dispensary?
Sure. Anybody, any business owners, and especially, it actually asks, right now on the Missouri Department of Health has put out draft application questions. And one of those is, who on your group or what type of background in pharmacy do you have? So we absolutely expect that there will be pharmacists that are involved to go after and seek these licenses. But you won't see them traditionally set up in a pharmacy.
Okay, so you won't
necessarily.
have the Green Cross at Sink's Pharmacy. They can't dispense out of there because they're regulated by the feds.
Yeah, that's usually the problem, but you will see a lot of pharmacists and doctors and others that have a healthcare background are getting involved in this.
Okay.
There is one thing that surprised me.
Mhm.
A couple of weeks ago in Creve Coeur, I saw at a major intersection, Ballas and Olive, looked like a yard sign with a doctor saying, basically, come see me, 1-800, I'll get you a medical marijuana card. Those are the things that give this a bad name.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is what Amendment 2 does, is it says that it has to be a state licensed physician. An MD or a DO is the only one that can write that certification. And what the doctor's doing there, again, because it's federally illegal still, what the doctor's doing is saying, okay, here are the 10 qualifying conditions. Does this patient in front of me, do they meet one of those 10 qualifying
You
conditions?
missed my point.
But yeah, but
My point is,
the doc shops, somebody that opens up and just wants to write prescriptions or whatever,
Yeah.
that is not good
It's
for the
very
program.
sad that that's how they're going to start this, is, a half-assed doctor sitting there, advertising at Ballas and Olive, but that's.
Yeah,
isn't it?
I mean, the good, one of the reasons I think you see so much support, I mean, to put this into perspective, on the November ballot here in Missouri, this was the leading vote getter on the entire ballot. Got more votes than any other patient or any other politician or ballot issue. And I think part of that is, I think a lot of Missourians want to put doctors and patients back in charge of their medical treatment
Yeah.
options.
It passed 60-40 in Phelps County.
Yeah, it passed in more than 90 of the 114 counties, including Phelps here, which was the one I was paying a little bit of attention to on election night.
Okay, let's go, a lot of questions, I'm sure, so let's go down through this. David, you're first.
Okay. First one I want to ask, just actually in response to what the mayor said, there is a chance that this doctor maybe is trying to get in touch with patients too, legitimate patients, to let them know where they could, because a lot of patients don't know which doctors are going to be prescribing. So just to mention that. But one of the main question I had was, for example, you go to a bar, you can order alcohol and you can drink it on site. A lot of people are concerned about bars or something like this where you could consume it on site. This is just a place where you would get your medicine and you go to somewhere else. Is that correct? You wouldn't be consuming it on site. So
No,
it's not like a concern for folks for that.
You're absolutely correct. Under Amendment 2, public consumption of medical marijuana is illegal. Driving under the influence of medical marijuana is still illegal.
Thank you.
But yeah, this will just be the retail location, and then obviously you take that home to the Privacy Bureau.
Tiffany?
So when you say providers, medical providers that are they licensed in Missouri only? Only Missouri licensed physicians or?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Under Amendment 2, only a state licensed, a Missouri
Do they-
MD or DO would be able to write that
Okay.
certification.
And so do they have to have any special, do they have to apply to be able to do this, or any of them, like, say, any of them at Phelps Health, they can prescribe medical marijuana? There's going to be no restrictions?
No,
as long as they'd have
yeah.
to have a license in Missouri to practice in Missouri?
Yeah, as long as they're licensed in Missouri, but the Missouri Department of Health, in the rules and regulations, has laid out the exact regulations. What does a doctor need to be able to do to certify this, you know?
Okay.
And so that's part of what the department is issuing right now. those
Okay.
rules.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead, David.
No, wait, hold on. Oh, hold on. Let's stay with some
Oh.
format here. Go ahead.
If there's no on-site consumption, can you help me understand the rationale behind limiting the hours of operation?
It's really up to the community, right? And some Springfield, Missouri is debating this exact question. They're at the very end of their ordinance process. They will pass one tonight, and they did have hours of operation. They ended up taking those hours of operation off, essentially saying, look, that's a decision the business owner ought to make or whatever. So it's really just up to the community. If it makes sense to have hours of operation in one community, it might make sense. In another community, it may not.
Thank you.
John?
Yeah, I was going to ask about the 1,000-foot thing.
Mhm.
Was that the flexibility written into the ballot language? How do, I mean, when we voted on this, did we vote that 1,000 feet was was it clear that this was flexible? Help me understand the flexibility in the 1,000-foot.
Yeah, absolutely. What essentially it says is that it has to be 1,000 foot from church, daycare, or school, unless a local community comes in and reduces that. So right here, it says, however, local governments may enact ordinances or regulations not in conflict with this section. A local government may establish governing the time, place, and manner of operations. And so that's, that is essentially what we've done here, is that we don't allow local governments to prohibit these outright, but we do allow you to put some rules and regulations around those. So a lot of cities, like we've seen, that are going through this process are reducing that. Clearly, 1,000 foot is fairly burdensome. In some compact cities, it essentially makes all of these facilities go to the far outskirts of towns. In some communities, that'll be appropriate. In other communities, it isn't. We believe that obviously patient access is important, so making sure that we have something that's accessible for the patients is important. But yeah, this was something that we put in there and was fairly known up front, that these will be 1,000 foot unless a local city has to proactively act to reduce that.
Thank you.
Rachel?
So I have a question, because it seems like from the examples you gave of how these ordinances are being changed, that 300 feet seemed to be one that a lot of cities were feeling comfortable with. Is that because that's tied to, say, the distances that pharmacies generally have in the state of Missouri from those from schools and daycares, or is it something else, or?
Yeah, it's a great question. 200 to 300 feet is a lot of times what you'll see as setbacks in different ordinances. For instance, for alcohol, liquor, or bar, or something, a lot of times you'll see 200 or 300 feet as that setback. So a lot of cities are going in and saying, look, 1,000 foot really means that we're not going to have any of these anywhere in our central core. We want those. We want to make that accessible. So let's go ahead and essentially regulate this a little more like we do alcohol or something like that.
Okay.
The difference being, obviously, anybody age 21 can walk into a liquor store. Anybody that's age 21 can walk into a bar. Here, you're going to walk through the front door, and the very first thing they're going to say is, I need to see your patient ID, please. and they're going to scan that and immediately be able to tell you, is this person a patient? Are they allowed in here?
Okay.
How much have they purchased over the last month? Are they over their limit? This is going to be a very highly regulated system.
Okay, so the cards are actually going to be able to tell, like, no, this person already, was in St. Louis and they bought this much, and, okay,
Absolutely, up to the minute.
okay.
Daniel, one second. John, our ordinances for a liquor store, the distances between a liquor store and a church, day school, or whatever, what is it?
I think it's 100 foot.
Okay. Daniel?
That was one of my questions. I have a few. Okay, so, okay, John, do we have a time in town when pharmacies, when their hours are open or not open?
Nope.
We don't have anything like that here, okay. And Mayor, you asked the same question I was gonna ask. There's a 100-foot buffer between alcohol and schools and churches, and what is the?
Bars and liquor stores.
It's for a liquor license.
Okay.
I phrased my question as a liquor store only because in a bar, you're gonna be consuming it there, whereas a liquor store, you're typically leaving, and this is leaving.
Right.
The statutory authority was to go up to 300 feet, I think, on liquors and bars. We did 100 foot. Even then, there can be an exemption if the board of directors of the church school expresses support of it. They can actually grant a waiver. The city council can grant a waiver with that feedback of somebody that happens to penetrate that distance. So this is different than how we're treating bars and liquor stores, and specifically with respect to drugstores, we have no limitation on drugstore.
We have none.
Drugstores operating like any other retail establishment. Some can run 24 hours a day, and some choose to run different hours. So this is being treated, it's being brought into the state sort of as another drugstore operation. We are imposing regulations and restrictions that do distinguish it from other bars, restaurants, or bars and taverns and pharmacies.
That does concern me a little bit that we would distinguish it from a pharmacy, though, because that is what we voted. When I checked that box, that is what I voted in, was it as a medicine. So that's kind of my assumption also, and a lot of folks' assumptions, that we would continue to treat this like a pharmacy until further law brings it to a recreational standpoint or whatever else. And then my other question is, so in town, if someone sells alcohol to a minor or to someone who's not supposed to have it, what is that? What happens to that? Does that business get shut down?
It can. I mean, they're going to be issued citations. If it's a pattern, they can certainly shut it down or revoke the license as a result. And if the state alcohol inspectors are doing it, it's even a higher standard of what can happen.
Right. Now, my understanding about the cannabis industry is that the same kind of thing happens. That person can lose their ability to dispense cannabis, correct?
Yes, the Missouri Department of Health, their rules and regulations at the state level talk about if someone has been given a patient card but then abuses that and breaks the rules, what happens, and it's immediately revoked.
Do you have any idea whatsoever what it's going to cost a person to open one of these dispensaries?
So, let me give you a little background. The Missouri Department of Health, what they've asked for on the application process, and this should give you somewhat, what they've said is, if you plan to apply for a dispensary, can you show $150,000 of assets, capital that you plan to commit to this project?
That's just to get the ball rolling.
That gives you some idea of the security requirements alone are going to be highly, highly expensive.
My point being is that it's going to be a whole lot harder to sell cannabis to someone illicitly and illegally through a dispensary than it certainly would ever happen through a liquor store or even a pub, which we see that often. I think we had some incidents on St. Pat's, correct? Where we had some minors that bought alcohol. I don't think that that's something that we see. I don't think
every day of the week.
I don't think that that's something that you see with dispensaries when they open up. Hence, the buffer zone, I think, is. We would want to protect that industry a little bit as we welcome them into our community. My point being is that 300 is a lot of buffer, and I see that encroaching on Pine Street.
Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. We're trying to get the basics here, so later in the agenda, we could rip through that. I do have a question. So a dispensary could sell something other than medical marijuana, right, in the building? Is that correct?
No.
So this place of business could only sell medical marijuana?
Yes, this will be a highly regulated by the Missouri
No
Department of
pipes
Health.
or?
Well, paraphernalia is a part of that, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, they could sell that.
You're a little bit unsure there.
Yeah, I mean, but you wouldn't have them selling unrelated items or whatever. This wouldn't be, sitting in the back of a hardware store, for instance.
And they would only be selling it to people with the card.
Yeah, you can't ever get to that back room.
I thought where you dispense this, there had to be sort of a separate area. So if I have a place of business and I'm the front of the store, the Pine Street, for instance, sells all this stuff, but the medical marijuana is sold in the back or something like that. It's not, what I'm trying to drive at is this stuff going to be advertised on the front window on Pine Street? Buy your pot here.
No, and again, signage, issues like that are absolutely within your guys' purview. To look at what type of signage, how big, what can it say, what can't it say.
Okay,
Other cities
but
have
could the
looked at that.
counter be right there behind the window?
No, so like what you said earlier, the first thing you walk into is essentially going to be a controlled access. You'll have to go through that waiting room, essentially, where you're going to show your card, where it'll get scanned. You'll wait there until you can ever be taken back where the actual medical marijuana is. And even then, there are staffing requirements, right? For every customer that's back there, you have to have an employee. So it's a highly regulated experience, but you won't ever actually get back there until you get past that first gate.
Okay, thank you. Matthew?
I had one more question.
Let's go to Matthew. He had his hand up.
Okay.
I'll come back to you.
Okay, I appreciate it.
So right now, we're talking about the 1,000-foot buffer zone, and we couldn't exceed that, but certainly we could require zoning. So in our city, a pharmacy is C2, correct?
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think it's
Liquor-
C2 conditional use, but.
Right.
Yeah.
Or a liquor store would be C3.
C2 conditional use, C3.
Okay. So essentially, we couldn't exceed 1,000 feet, but we could zone or require this to be zoned in a commercial district, such as C2, C3, or CC, which would include all of those.
Right.
And that, in a sense, would limit a lot of or potentially limit the interactions with residential neighborhoods and things like that.
Yeah.
And we think, from our perspective, we think that's smart government, right? Is that utilize the setbacks in some way, where a church, a daycare, or a school are, a little bit subjective. But you guys have already looked at your land use codes. You know what you would allow in a C2. You know what you would allow in an M1, right? For instance.
Have other cities looked at that and decided where they're placing their zoning with these dispensaries?
Absolutely, yeah. And most of them, residential areas, obviously off limits. But retail area, right, is certainly would be appropriate for a dispensary. Cultivation, right, essentially cultivation is going to be in a large warehouse facility. And so that's going to be slightly different. Maybe not retail, but light industrial, something like that. But yeah, every city's looking at that right now.
Does cultivation have to be allowed within a city under the amendment?
Yeah, so the city cannot prohibit a facility. They can regulate it, and they can't be overly burdensome. You cannot prohibit it outright.
That's growing as a business and growing for personal use. Right.
So essentially, if I want to farm marijuana in the city of Rolla, I could do that if I get licensed?
You would have to get one of the 60 licenses throughout the state. There would
But
be
if
60.
you have the card, you can grow it in your garden next to your tomatoes. In a residential.
That's not true. Yeah, there's
Talk about that, Jack, if you would, just about the.
Yeah.
Explain.
There's a lot of restrictions there too, a lot of security also.
Yeah, so everything we've talked about is retail sales. What Amendment 2 also allows is patient cultivation. That essentially allows, not only do you have to go through and you have to get your patient card, which is only $25, and that's pretty normal and straightforward. If you want to have patient cultivation, you have to pay an extra $100 to the state. That allows you in a locked, enclosed facility that you only have access to allow 6 flowering plants. So that
No outdoor growing.
What's that?
No outdoor growing?
No, it has to be. It's a locked, confined space with controlled
What if my
access.
yard is fenced in and locked?
You I believe the restrictions are gonna, the restrictions can apply to outside too also, or no?
If you could lock.
If I have a Fort Knox greenhouse, can I grow in it?
The Missouri Department of Health is looking at that issue
Okay.
as we speak.
Okay.
So that is something there.
Yeah, can you go back to signage? What kind of latitude do we have on signage? Because if we're going to compare these things to pharmacists, which some of you seem to prefer, I don't see in the front window of the pharmacy all the drug ads.
Yeah, and so that is absolutely within your purview. How big those signs are, what words can and can't be used on that makes sense. From a local community's perspective, one community may not treat that signage issue the same as another. So that absolutely is something you guys can dive into.
Didn't we run into that before, though, in terms of actual limiting your actual speech? I mean, in any sign that you could, we can limit the parameters of it, we can't limit what you say on it. Isn't that correct?
Yeah,
I mean, so we could be in a little bit of a worry if we did that. Isn't that true?
Yeah, the way we're proposing is we're not proposing any sign regulations beyond the sign regulations in those permitted zones.
Right.
Some of the questions are for the public, so they just have a whole sense of
Yeah,
Sure.
of course. I think that's great.
I think part of the thing there too is I don't see that there's going to be a whole lot of need for advertising or things like that. I believe if you're a card holder, you don't have a whole lot of choices to go in your area, correct?
Like we said, there'll be 24 of these in the entire 8th Congressional District. Will there be one or two of them in Rolla? Possibly, but that'll probably be about it. So,
I have one more question. I noticed in here that we had we had the ability to zone the buffer between two dispensaries. And I'm kind of not seeing the purpose there. Maybe someone can show me a reason or tell me a reason why we would have a buffer between two dispensaries. Because I look at many different.
Let's save that question for when we talk about our proposed ordinance. I don't think that's a question for Jack. That's not why Jack is here.
Okay.
That's a good question.
Great.
Jack, have you seen that issue surface in the other cities that you worked with?
That was my question.
We've just started to see a city or two. St. Joseph is looking to put in a buffer between multiple facilities or whatever. So we've started to see that just now pop up. The logistical problems come in. Two people both get licenses. They're half a block away from each other. They both went through this rigorous process with the state. We're one of the only ones chosen who gets to keep their location. Whoever came
What are the
first?
pros and cons of a buffer between the two?
But between the two, I think it's hard. I think I can understand why cities would want to do that, right? You want patient access. And if we're going to talk about patient access, having them right next to each other doesn't necessarily get you that, right? So that's one reason you'd want to put in. The logistical problems of who has that right, who gets that entitlement. If two of them go through this entire process and the state picks two operators, they just happen to be on the same block, which one loses their license? Or do they have to move? Or what's their fallback? Yeah. I don't think the buffer necessarily is a bad idea. It's just logistically, it's hard you could see some unforeseen consequences. I was in government for a long time, which is a world of unforeseen consequences, as you guys know. So,
David?
Just one last thing. I was just going to mention, though, that, I mean, in terms of competition, maybe that's good. Like you see gas stations across from each other, it does maybe make the prices more competitive, too. But.
Yeah, and that's, with every state is hiring this differently. We're going to have 192 dispensaries across the state. Arkansas, for instance, they passed theirs in 2016. They only have a few dozen, right? And so having 192 dispensaries, we like that when we wrote it because we think it does two things, right? It allows access. No one's driving halfway across the state to get this, but at the same time, there's going to be enough of these that there'll be competition. Competition, even within a closed market like we're talking about here, always helps the consumer, right? They're going to get a better product at a better price and better customer service. And we think that's what hopefully the Missouri program ends up being the model for.
Good primer. As I said, this is just the start of the process. So after tonight, it goes to planning and zoning. There's at least one public hearing there, and then coming back here for two readings and comment and so on and so forth. So we might ask you back.
Absolutely. I appreciate the time tonight. And please let me know if you have any other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we move on to the second one, let's just get the next section of our agenda out. That is the reports of mayor and council reports, boards and commissions. There's 9. Any questions on any of these? Okay, before we go on to old business, we have a visitor here that's traveled some distance. The next topic is completely independent of the topic that we've just finished. The one we just finished is a state law. It was passed at the ballot box. There's another request. Councilperson Jones, representing some constituents, would like the city to consider decriminalizing small quantities of marijuana for recreational use. We're going to talk about it a little bit more extensively in the council comments, and Daniel could make a bigger presentation at that point. But would you like to introduce your guest, who's going to give us some at least initial comments to get us thinking about what we'll talk about here in half hour?
I would. I'd like to make a short statement first, if that's okay. Good evening, everyone. I have a short statement to make before I introduce my guest speaker. There's many citizens who are not in this room tonight. There's a significant population of Rolla. Some of them are janitors, some are lawyers, some of them paint the lines on the side of the roads, and some of them are educators. They're recreational cannabis users. I'm going to spend the next few minutes trying to be their voice. Mayor Lou, you told me once that you saw Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead live. Jerry Garcia said it best when he said somebody has to do something. It's incredibly pathetic that it has to be us. Today I'd like to do something. I'd like to begin the discussion to decriminalize small amounts of cannabis in Rolla. No longer should people, in my opinion, be arrested and penalized for a non-toxic plant most Americans think should be legal. I don't believe the people of Rolla want to be a community known for partying hard on St. Pat's with our whiskeys, our beers, our friends, and our neighbors, while at the same time imprisoning the recreational pot smoker next to us. I know, as a recreational pot smoker, that arrest and detainment of cannabis users is an unjust, archaic, and flat-out dangerous way to handle cannabis possession. I know this because I was jailed for 256 days with a $300,000 bond over my head for a plant. That was a larger bond than the child molesters I shared my cell with. That's a broken system, Rolla. I intend to help right that ship. My ward and my city should not be subjected to this kind of hurtful policy. It's imperative to me and the many others I speak for that we decriminalize 35 grams and under of marijuana in Rolla city limits. With implementation of medical marijuana right around the corner, we're looking at a prosecutorial gap that no recreational smoker wants to face. It's dangerous and it should be stricken down. Missouri voters made their path clear when they voted overwhelmingly for Amendment 2. I believe it's time for Rolla to recognize that the times are changing and our policies must change with them. I've heard people in this room call decriminalization controversial. To those people, I'd say this: jailing people for cannabis possession is controversial. Sensible drug policy is not. Keep in mind, Rolla, that when we discuss this, we're not talking about legalizing marijuana. We're talking about doing away with some very obesely misguided drug policy. A sensible ordinance would still fine an individual up to $500 for possession if we see fit. We should still, because the state says we have to for now, punish people for possession. That weighs heavy on my heart still. But we should do it while protecting our citizens and students and tourists' abilities to get educations and meaningful jobs after. Cannabis possession should not affect a person's permanent record. Arrest and detainment for small amounts of cannabis is simply a silly and outdated policy, and we are much better than that. Our community is in the depths of a very terrible opioid epidemic and a recent return and uprising of methamphetamines. We should not be wasting our precious public safety resources on chasing a plant we all know is not out to get us. Thank you for listening, council and citizens. I'm proud to be here today representing a major population of Rolla that doesn't typically show up to these kind of meetings or discussions. Thank you for the opportunity to serve in their stead. With that, I'd like to welcome my guest to speak. He's a subject matter on Missouri cannabis decriminalization ordinances. He served for many years as the Missouri State Coordinator for NORML, as well as being the former president of the Missouri Association of Criminal Defense Attorneys, former chair of the board of Mid-Missouri ACLU. Mr. Viets was a recipient of the Martin Luther King Association's Keeping the Dream Alive Award and the Mid-Missouri Civil Libertarian of the Year. And my favorite, Dan was named High Times Freedom Fighter of the Month in March 2005 for his work helping to pass both the Marijuana Decriminalization Initiative and a Medical Marijuana Initiative in Columbia. Thank you in advance for your wisdom and your clarifications, Dan. We're grateful for you to be here tonight.
Would you please state your name and address for the record?
I'm sorry, yes, I'm Dan Viets. I'm an attorney from Columbia. I've practiced law throughout the state of Missouri, including right here in Phelps County for about 33 years. And as Mr. Jones said, I've worked for an even longer period of time with a group called the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. NORML chapters around the state of Missouri played a large role in the adoption of Amendment 2, which is now actually, of course, Article 14 of our Missouri State Constitution. I've also worked with New Approach Missouri, which is the group that drafted Article 14, the group that put it on the ballot, and the group that campaigned for its passage. And as Jack Cardetti pointed out, it didn't just pass, it passed big time. It passed with 66% of the vote, what most would call a landslide, far more votes than any other of the half dozen initiatives on that ballot, far more votes than any of the statewide candidates on that ballot. And although, Mr. Mayor, you're correct, it's a separate issue from decriminalization of adult use, there is obviously some connection, some relationship. And I suggest to you that part of that relationship is the fact that the attitudes of the American public are rapidly evolving on many issues that relate to marijuana in one way or another. I also chair the board of Missouri's other business organization, the Missouri Cannabis Industry Association, and I can tell you that we're actively involved in working with the Department of Health and Senior Services on the rules and regulations which are now being drafted, and as Jack said, will be announced in their final form by the 4th of June of this year. Opioids are a big part of the reason why we needed medical marijuana to be legalized. Everyone's aware of the fact that opioids are taking a tremendous toll on our society. The thousands of people have died in recent years from overdoses of opioid drugs. What is not nearly as well known is the fact that in the 33 states that have, the 32 at least, which have previously legalized medical marijuana access, there's been a dramatic reduction in death from opioid overdose. The best study that established this, the initial study that established this, was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, Internal Medicine, in August of 2014. And a simple correlation of the per capita rate of opioid overdose death and comparing that in the states which have legalized access to medical marijuana with the states which had not, revealed that on average there are 25% fewer people dying from opioids each year in the states which have access to medical marijuana. And the fact that this is not just some cosmic coincidence or some accident or just a correlation, rather than cause and effect, is buttressed by the fact that same study showed that the reduction in opioid overdose death is greatest in the states which have had legal access to medical marijuana longer. And it's the least, down to as low as 20%, in the states which have only recently adopted medical marijuana laws. So there is almost certainly a true cause and effect relationship here. And the reason for that, and this has been shown in other subsequent studies, is that the prescribing of opioid drugs is dramatically reduced, and the prescribing of certain other pharmaceuticals, which also can have very negative side effects, has been dramatically reduced when people have access to medical marijuana. So I want to start out with those comments on that topic. I want to acknowledge that Jack Cardetti was an important part of our team. We hired Jack to be the spokesman for the New Approach Missouri campaign. He did a great job for us. But the movement to reform marijuana laws here in Missouri actually began long before the voters passed Amendment 2 last November. And one aspect of that evolution began in 2004 when the city of Columbia adopted what I think is appropriately called a decriminalization ordinance. I know that term puts some people off, but it is in fact an accurate description of what we accomplished through an initiative in 2004 in Columbia. Now the classical definition, if you can call it that, of decriminalization as opposed to legalization, is that with decriminalization it's not legal, number one, but we eliminate arrests. The authorities issue citations, a ticket, essentially, rather than making a full custody arrest. That among the penalties available are not a term in jail. And thirdly, that the defendant doesn't end up with a criminal conviction record. So under city ordinance in 2004 in Columbia, an ordinance was passed that limited punishment to fines of $200. It also instructed the police not to arrest people for these offenses, but instead to issue a ticket for them. And since Missouri's municipal courts are not criminal courts, in a sense, every city ordinance violation is not a criminal offense and could be called decriminalization. It's important to know also that the state of Missouri in 2014 passed a law that some have, I think mistakenly, called decriminalization. But it is, without question, an important step in the right direction, an important step in the evolution of a more enlightened approach to marijuana use. And that is when the Missouri Criminal Code was revised. The legislature adopted this law in 2014. It was the biggest single bill ever filed, a 1,000-page monster bill that rearranged and rewrote all of the criminal laws in the state of Missouri. I had the privilege of serving on the Missouri Bar Committee that drafted this bill, and we had recommended that up to 35 grams of marijuana be made a non-jailable offense. The legislature, being the legislature, of course, compromised that down to 10 grams, but that is in fact the state of the law in Missouri since that bill became effective, that there is no jail any longer under the laws of our state for the first offense possession of up to 10 grams of marijuana. And most people don't get caught with more than 10 grams. That actually has affected a great many cases. So we have the rather anomalous situation now that in many cities, the city ordinance punishment, or at least the range of punishment for city ordinance marijuana possession, is actually greater than the range of punishment for a state law violation, a true criminal law violation that goes to the circuit courts instead of the municipal courts. But other cities have followed Columbia's example and have to some degree actually adopted the language that we drafted in Columbia back in 2004, and among them is the city of St. Louis, which adopted several years ago through its Board of Aldermen an ordinance which eliminates the possibility of jail for marijuana possession, limits the fine, I believe, to $500 in that case, and at least encourages police officers to send these cases all to the city court. Now, I think that's an important component of any such law, because otherwise police have the total discretion to send these cases to the state court for criminal prosecution or to the city courts. I don't think, frankly, that discretion should be allowed. It results in rather arbitrary and capricious results. The fact is that Columbia's ordinance mandates that all such cases go to the city court and not the state court. But what's happened in St. Louis and in St. Louis County and in Jackson County since just last year is that the prosecuting attorneys in each of those three jurisdictions, and bear in mind these jurisdictions contain almost 1/3 of our state's population, in each of those jurisdictions the prosecutor has declared that he or she will not prosecute possession of up to 100 grams of marijuana, what would otherwise be a felony offense in many cases, period. And prosecutors have that discretion. Prosecutors have a great deal of discretion. So that indeed, if you're going to be prosecuted at all for marijuana possession in St. Louis right now, it's going to be in the municipal court, because the St. Louis City prosecutor won't prosecute possession up to 100 grams. The St. Louis County prosecutor joined and will not prosecute up to 100 grams. So those cases, too, if they're prosecuted at all, are done in the many municipal courts that exist within St. Louis County. Jackson County, actually the single largest county by population in Missouri, adopted an ordinance through the initiative process. In April of 2017, a truly amazing event happened in Jackson County, in Kansas City. A small group of citizens with almost no money at all, it was actually the normal chapter in Kansas City, decided to place an initiative on the ballot there. They followed Columbia's basic model. They revised and adapted it, and one of the things they did was limit the punishment to a fine of $25. Now, they put this on the ballot in April, and in the wisdom of most conventional observers, progressive initiatives do best when there are more people voting. So presidential election ballots are when these things do better. That's when Columbia passed its ordinance on a presidential ballot in 2004. So when you put these on the ballot in an off year, like Amendment 2 was, or especially on a municipal ballot, an April ballot, you're really facing a tremendous handicap. There aren't nearly as many voters, and the ones who do vote every time tend to be older, more conservative, more wealthy. So I was frankly worried that Kansas City ordinance wasn't going to pass. But I applauded the effort. I thought they deserved to win, of course. Well, they had the Kansas City Star against them. They had some council members who were former prosecutors against them. And when the votes were counted, 75% of the voters in a rather conservative turnout election endorsed reducing marijuana possession fines to $25 in our state's largest county. Now that was a pretty remarkable event. that was a breathtaking outcome. And the point of all this, again, is that there is a clear trend among the voters across our state to recognize that treating responsible adults who use marijuana responsibly like criminals is just not a good idea. It doesn't accomplish anything positive. The most often stated concern about reforming marijuana laws is that our young people will begin to smoke more marijuana. People imagine that young people refrain from using it because us adults say it's a bad thing to do. And I think if anything, the opposite is the case. A lot of young people figure if the adults say not to do it, that maybe it is a good thing to do. And the fact is that there's not a single instance where the use of marijuana by young people has been shown to have increased because of a change in the adult marijuana laws. That is so important to understand. In fact, in Colorado, for instance, the state concluded that there is no increase in any demographic group in marijuana use since they legalized marijuana in 2012 in the state of Colorado. And that is so fundamentally important because no matter what harm we think comes from marijuana use, no matter what we think it causes, car wrecks or schizophrenia or all these other kind of reefer madness fears that people have, and some of them are reasonable. I don't mean to totally dismiss them, but the fact is, if there's no increase in use of marijuana, then none of these collateral evils are going to increase either. So that, it seems to me, is the single most important fact to understand about reforming the marijuana laws. If it's not going to increase use, then why not do it? In fact, why continue squandering tax money and ruining people's lives by prosecuting them if we're not reducing marijuana use? And that's what that fact means also. All of the things we do, all the prosecutions that we engage in, and the tax money we spend doesn't reduce marijuana use. So what possible good does it do? And I suggest nothing. I would be happy to answer your questions. And thank you for your time.
I'd certainly take some questions, but again, this is not a public hearing. There'll be a time and place for a longer discussion if council chooses to proceed. So, Daniel?
I just wanted to reiterate real quick that basically the definition of decriminalizing cannabis in this area would be no jail, correct?
Mm-hmm.
No arrest, no detainment, no conviction.
No criminal conviction record yet.
So no jail, no arrest, no criminal conviction. That's what we're looking at here for decriminalization. Okay.
And I just wanted to clarify, is that for first offenses only or any number?
Under state law, it's first offense only. Under Columbia's ordinance, there's no limit.
Okay.
And I don't think the other cities have limited the application. I know Kansas City didn't.
Okay.
Rachel?
I just had a quick question, because thinking about the comparison between the different cities, right? Like if Rolla is a third-class city, like does that change what we can do versus say, like, because St. Louis is a charter city, right? And I don't know about Columbia.
Columbia is. And I don't know is the short answer.
Okay.
I don't want to speculate. I suspect Mr. Thurman here might know the answer to that question, but
there are significant restrictions from what a third-class city can do versus a charter city.
Okay.
Charter city can basically set up their own form of government. I would have to look at, there are going to be issues with any possibility of decriminalization. One of the things that I heard Mr. Veet say is that they passed as part of it in St. Louis City that all marijuana cases have to go through municipal court.
In Columbia.
Well, you said St. Louis as well, and part of that was because the prosecuting attorney said that he's not going to pursue anything less than 100 grams. I want you to understand, nothing that this body does can change what the elected Phelps County prosecuting attorney does. If he decides that he will prosecute those cases and a police officer sends a case over to Phelps County, our ordinance isn't going to prevent that person from being prosecuted. That's a concern, and I just want to point that out because that is a significant distinction. unless we have heard from the county prosecuting attorney that he's on board with this, I think that's a conversation that needs to take place with this board before moving forward. Because if you don't get him on board, whatever we do here may not have the impact that you're wanting it to.
Well, Lance, I may have misspoken. I'm not sure St. Louis did include that provision.
Okay.
So I want to make sure I go on record saying I'm not sure they did. Columbia did for sure. But here's the way I look at that issue. I mean, some people in Columbia wanted to argue that Columbia didn't have the right to tell its police force what to do either. But, you know, the police department is just like the water and light department, just like the, you know, all the other departments of state government. They work for this council. They work for the people of this city. And the city police department of Columbia follows our ordinance. Now, I will acknowledge that highway patrolmen, when they are in the city of Columbia, at least at this point, still send their cases to state court, as do Boone County Sheriff's deputies. When they're operating within the city limits, they still do that. Our ordinance actually says when any law enforcement officer suspects an individual of possession. But I'll acknowledge those two agencies are not following the ordinance. The city police department, which makes about 80% of the arrests, does follow it.
And again, what I'm pointing out, you can pass the ordinance. If the officer sends it over, you have the choice you can fire him for insubordination if you want to try, but that doesn't prevent the prosecutor, once he receives the report, from filing the charge.
I defer to you as a former prosecutor on that point.
The prosecutor has absolute authority to file charges or not file charges. What I would encourage this body to do is, again, talking about those other 3 metropolitan areas where the elected prosecuting attorney made that statement. If you're not going to bring him into this conversation, you're not going to afford the citizens that you're talking about protecting any protection unless he's on board with that as well. So if that is an essential part of what you're trying to do, you need to have that conversation with him as well.
I think that if it's something that the council decided to go forth with and look at as something that we wanted to adopt, I think it would be a very loud voice to say for the council, if they went after something like this and approved it, that's a very loud voice that's saying stop, that's saying don't do that in our community anymore, that's saying our people cannot continue to be prosecuted for something that 60-something% of Americans don't think they should be prosecuted for. It's getting to the point now to where if we keep handing all of these ideas and these decisions to the people like prosecutors who are chasing these plants or like militarized police departments, then we're going to continue to fall short. I think that even if our prosecution team were not on board with this, they need to hear loud and clear that the people of Rolla don't want to prosecute cannabis anymore.
Okay, so we went well over to 3-4 minutes. Council will discuss this on the back end of this later tonight on how you want to proceed. Thank you, and if they choose to proceed, I'm sure we'll ask you back for
Thank you, sir.
a more formal presentation.
Have a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Viets.
Moving on. Moving on to, there is no old business. Moving on to new business. The first is a draft overview of the medical marijuana facility regulations.
But this was fun. We've been watching some of the other cities that have been talking about this issue. So, I mean, this was fun drafting this ordinance. There's lots of tough issues to deal with. But we've been sort of monitoring what's been happening in the state. We've been monitoring what some of our other cities across the state are doing with respect to the medical marijuana. And we drafted an ordinance that we know is not satisfying all parties, right? This has to go through a very deliberative input process. No sense really recapping everything that we've talked about today. So I'll just go to kind of some of the key elements of the ordinance that we've placed before you. But let me start off by saying we're really not asking council for approval tonight.
Yeah.
In fact, we're saying you can't approve it, right? This has to go through a public hearing process through P&Z. P&Z will make a recommendation. We'll end up with another public hearing back before the city council. And then the city council has complete disclosure and discretion over what they want to adopt. So let me just kind of walk through a little bit what we created here. So it's an ordinance that does reflect the 4 types of business licenses that the state of Missouri, the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services, are going to be addressing. It's the marijuana dispensary, which most likely is the most significant issue that's going to impact us. But there's also the medical marijuana testing facility, the medical marijuana cultivation facility, and the medical marijuana infused products facility. And I want to say there's only, Daniel, maybe you know, is there 2 of those being issued statewide?
2 total.
2 statewide. Oh, Jack's still here too. We can run those by Jack as well. So
And I can't imagine if they'd land those in Rolla.
hard to imagine. Hard to imagine. And so if you look at the bottom of page 6A1 in your packets, I apologize, I should have probably clarified what the X's and C's and P's are. And this is just as it's proposed in the ordinance. So the X's mean it's not allowed. So, for instance, the dispensing facility is not being proposed to be allowed in the residential areas. The CO, which is our commercial office, C1, which is very light commercial, C2 is neighborhood commercial. We're proposing that as a conditional use, and therefore, in our ordinance, it becomes a permitted use in C3 and CC, which is our city center district. And then we don't provide that in our manufacturing districts, which tend to be on the fringes of the community. Again, the whole issue is about an access, and we don't currently do retail in our manufacturing zones. The testing facility, we're proposing as a conditional use in C2, permitted in C3, permitted in Central City, permitted in M1, permitted in M2. The infused products facility, conditional use in C3. C3 is our most intense commercial zone. It actually borders on a little bit of sort of the heavy commercial side. So all of our highway frontage, much of that falls under C3. Conditional use there, permitted use in CC, permitted in M1, M2, that's our light and heavy industrial. The one that I had the biggest uncertainty of, and maybe it's not an issue really for us and easier to just exclude it, is the cultivation facility. I've got a question mark under RR, and I've got a question mark under RR because that's our rural residential zone, but that was really intended for the large areas of the south side where we really took in farms back in 1988, 99, farms that were doing lots of agricultural purposes, have cattle, others. This has such heavy regulations, I can't see this as an outdoor facility for us, but I was trying to debate, do we put that as a conditional use in RR and then a permitted use in the manufacturing zones? So I really just don't address it in the draft. Quite frankly, we'll raise that issue with P&Z and can bring that back ultimately for consideration. And we'll clarify that table when that goes to the planning and zoning requirement. The key issues, and I think we heard Jack and Dan spoke a little bit about this, is that time, schedule, location, authority that we do have here. The amendment was 1,000 foot, provides the ability to go less than that. The dispensing facilities, again, the most probably likely operation in Rolla, whether that's 1 or 2 or a few more than that. I just drafted this proposing 300 feet from any then existing school, child care center, and church, and there's a definition for what becomes then existing. You don't want somebody to be able to open up one of those school, child cares, or churches after permit that would then jeopardize the license. And I proposed a 500-foot spacing between marijuana dispensaries. I have no strong feelings about these. I'm just trying to assimilate sort of the discussion items that will be flushed out through the process. I did the 300-foot, and I'll share this. We provided this to City Council, and Carol, if you could put this up on the scale so that the folks in the audience can see it. It just seemed to me, if we're going to be doing a dispensary, that we needed to have that accessible. So this idea of sort of banishing these to the far corners of our heaviest commercial districts or into the manufacturing zones, it just didn't seem the spirit of what the voters authorized. And so downtown, our central city district, is our most flexible commercial district, and it seemed to me a reasonable place where a dispensary would be permitted. What you see in the circles, they are surrounding either a church, daycare, or a school in and around the downtown area, and that is the 300-foot circumference radius around those buildings. And so what we wanted to be able to see is, are there areas in the downtown area, Pine Street, if you think really between 6th Street and really 12th Street, are there good options for dispensaries along that corridor with the church at the corner of 10th and Pine? That certainly squeezes that down, but about half of Pine Street would be accessible under one of these applications. Actually, a couple of them could still do it and meet the 500-foot separation. We didn't propose these at 100-foot, 200-foot, 500-foot, 1,000-foot. We could have had diagrams that were showing all of those options. But a good way of looking at it is a block in the city of the downtown area is about 100 feet. So you could actually scale that back if you wanted to get a view of what a 100-foot or 200-foot radius would be. You could sort of look at a block is 100-foot spacing. So that's what we were proposing in the ordinance. That's subject to lots of discussion and consideration. We did propose, the one that we kept with 1,000 foot on the cultivation facilities, again, I don't think these are really likely. I did propose that we add beyond what the state authorizes, that we do 1,000 feet from any residentially zoned property. So that's a really high burden in our rural residential zone. So there are other issues that are limitations proposed in here, dealing with hours of operation, as you noted, fencing, security measures, whether that's a 10-foot tall, whether there's, what's the key clause? Yeah, the razor wire seemed excessive, but I saw that razor wire issue surfacing on some of these regulations, and so I've adopted those. So in the draft ordinance that's before you, everywhere you see sort of the underlines, and there's others, but those are the ones that I thought most likely when we go to P&Z, people are going to have those questions on those when it comes back to council. I wanted you all to know that you have control over those kinds of issues, and so they can be modified as the public input process accommodates.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question just on your map, actually?
Yeah.
Based on a block being 100 feet, it actually looks like we've made the circles a diameter of 300 feet, which is not 300 feet in every direction from. So, like 1 block, 2 block, 3 block in diameter, which actually, I thought what they're talking about is 300 from any corner of any of those churches would be, 0, 100, 200, 300 from any. So I'm just concerned that we made the circles as a diameter as opposed to a radius of 300. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because if you count off your blocks that you're saying 1 block, 2 block, 3 block, that's about how wide our circles are.
I think you're right.
Yeah, but I'm looking at my notes now. I think the 100-foot is a half block, but we'll verify that. We'll do that. I think it's, and I don't know if Darren's here, is it 300 foot?
300-foot radius.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
A block is, a lot on there is about 100 feet. A block is closer to 250.
Gotcha.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So again, certainly want to answer questions if you all want to have some dialogue, but what we're not asking you is for your endorsement of particular actions. Again, that will come back through the process. So are there things that you see in here that we've missed, things that you want to have us to go back and revisit? We're scheduled to have the public hearing before P&Z next Tuesday and the council meeting at the following Monday.
Daniel?
The one I still can't wrap my head around is the 500 between two dispensaries. I'm not sure where we're getting that buffer, but I just, I don't see the need for it at all. I also believe that the 300 feet is a bit extreme. I do think that there should be a buffer, maybe a little bit. I'm thinking like maybe 0 to 200 feet, maybe, but 300 feet of football field, that's a big distance. And I see here that does take out, almost half of Pine Street? Is that right?
Yeah. Right.
That's something I'm not interested in doing.
Okay. I'll share that with P&Z.
Great.
So.
And then the 500 between the two?
Yeah. And again, the only idea with the 500, and I think Dan said it well, or Jack said it well, is the idea of if you're truly trying to make these accessible, the thought was rather than congregating them all in one area, spread them.
I would
if we
assume
only
that-
see 1 or 2 or 3 of these in Rolla, I'm not sure that's a big factor for us anyway.
I would also assume that in someone's business plan that they wouldn't want to park next to their competitor, but I also, like they said, the idea that these folks have already, because a lot of folks have already put in a lot of money towards these with everything else, and they will in the future also. I don't think, I don't see the need for that much. And I also think that we should let those folks, let competition do its job. I'm not sure that it should be up to us to do that. If you could tell me why the buffer's there, maybe I could wrap my head around it a little better, but.
Okay.
David?
I had a quick thing, just, we're certainly a community of faith. We have a lot of churches, and we also are a community of education. We have a lot of schools and daycare. So that does then make, for example, the Lamb of God Church or the Vineyard First United Methodist, they're very close to our downtown, which is great that they're there and that they're part of our community. But the one thing I wanted to mention was just that based on what Mr. Cardetti mentioned about the process by which you get a card and the way things are regulated, walking into the dispensary is very regulated. You're helped one-on-one, all these things. I'm just trying to see, we have 100-foot distance for these same kinds of churches and such, it sounds like, for bars or liquor stores. But to me, this seems like something that is like very regulated, and also, when I think about alcohol, I know there's a lot of addiction involved in alcohol, and I know there's also, violence and aggression that can sometimes come with that. I don't see that with this plan, and I also don't see that with the certifications that we're going to be putting in place. So I actually think, from what Matthew said, we might want to even just look at the zoning side of it and say maybe there's a way we zone it through what you proposed in terms of C2s, C3s, and CCs that already limits its placement. So I would just maybe have that passed on to planning and zoning, that I kind of like looking at the zoning side of it as a way more than the distances or the 500 feet kind of thing. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Southside Shoppers World, how far would that be from Lyman, do you guys think, Aaron? I mean, that's more than 300 feet, isn't it? 400 feet. Southside Shoppers World, like where books and okay. I'm just thinking of, we're talking about Pine Street. We got a lot of other locations in Rolla.
Yeah.
So.
And there was a church on the backside, New Dimensions was a church that was in that area, which would have precluded all of Shoppers, Southside Shoppers World, but that's since relocated. But
And then the Forum, there's a church, right? But that's across the creek, and okay, so.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of other retail.
And when we talk with P&Z, we'll share more of that, trying to give more visuals to some of those areas.
So the 300 is not a recommendation. It's a guideline.
No, I mean, 300 is what I'm recommending, but just really balancing it off of what I've seen from other communities, wanting to still make it possible in the downtown area, but there's no ownership in the 300 feet. If that 300 foot was 200 foot or 500 foot, that is up to the policy decision makers.
Ann?
Okay, I just want clarification. On the cultivation, it seemed to me that I heard that that was to be done indoors.
For the 6 plants that are
for this home-based plants?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You can do the large-scale operation, indoor or outdoor, but I think most of the thought is that Missouri is just not going to be really accommodating for the outdoor.
Yeah, so Amendment 2 does contemplate of the 60 cultivation licenses, there's both an indoor or an outdoor. You can apply for either. Realistically, of those 60 licenses that are going to be for cultivation, almost all of them, if not every one of them, will be indoors. Missouri's humidity is just not known, and quite frankly, you get one crop a year versus 4 or 5. So of the 60 cultivation, I would expect almost all, if not every one of those, to be indoors. So when you're thinking about it from a zoning perspective, it's very much an indoor warehouse type facility.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking about the 10-foot fence with wire, with razor wire, wouldn't be necessary if it was all indoors.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
There's no other questions. Again, that was no action requested on that. It'll go to P&Z. Next item is a resolution opposing House Bill 1062 in support of the Grain Belt Express. Rodney?
Good evening, Mayor. I did pass out a copy of the slides to City Council, so you have those in front of you. I'll do my best to get those posted up on our website as well. I'll kind of talk about status of the Grain Belt Express project here at the end, but my intent here tonight was mainly give an overview of what the project is, the current legislation that's working through its way through the legislature today, and then the ask at the end, which is a resolution support in opposition to House Bill 1062. So again, real quickly about the project, this is, and I got a little bit more information here, but this is a 780-mile overhead DC transmission line taking wind from western Kansas to Indiana, dropping 500 megawatts of 4,000 megawatts of power into Missouri. That's going to create quite a few jobs, 1,500 jobs estimated in the state. Overall, hundreds of jobs, permanent jobs operate at the wind farm and the transmission line, $2.3 billion in development and construction. Again, a lot of that investment in Missouri. Long-term source of income for rural communities that host that line, meaning there's tax. This is a real facility, so it's going to have property taxes that go to those local taxing entities, fire districts, ambulance districts, counties, those types of people. It is a participant-funded merchant model project. That means it is a for-profit model, no different than Ameren and Kansas City Power and Light. All these private utilities are owned by the investors. They're in the business as a profit motive. But basically, with this project, the people accessing the power line or the transmission line are the ones paying for this transmission. Real quickly, again, the route, western Kansas, have a drop-off point in Missouri, up near the Palmyra Hannibal area I think it's in Rawls County, and then continuing on to Indiana, delivering the bulk of the power into the PJM, RTO, Regional Transmission Organization, out headed toward the East Coast. In Missouri, just again, I don't think I've ever shown this map, but in Missouri, basically, I think I've mentioned it, the power line comes in as it comes in from Kansas, just south of St. Joseph. And this route is defined. It's actually in the order that this is the final route based on the route selection process. It basically comes in south of St. Joe, routes through I think 8 Missouri counties on the north of I-70, and goes out just south of Hannibal. And if you go to I think it's grainbeltexpress.org or .com, you can see this map. You can click on each one of the individual map segments. You can pull up that information and see exactly how it's routed through, or the basic routing through any one of those counties. This project does have quite a bit of corporate support. A lot of these companies have a renewable portfolio standards similar to here locally Brewer Science, MS&T, but General Mills, Target, GM, Procter & Gamble, Hubble Power Systems, which is located up in Centralia, Missouri. They have very much an interest in this project because they will be producing a lot of the equipment to be used on this facility, actually gearing up to expand their facilities to support this project. Power Electrical Contractors, Nestle again, Walmart, again, another one that's has a renewable portfolio standard or working on one that they'd like to implement, like to get some of this clean power. So let's talk a little bit about Missouri. Again, this is to help power 39 Missouri communities. 35 of the 39 are part of the MOPET pool, which is Rolla is part of. And then in addition, Columbia, Kirkwood, Centralia, and I almost forget my fourth one, Hannibal, are the 4 other independent Missouri city utilities that would benefit from this project. It's estimated that we could save up to $12.8 million annually in our power supply costs. That is for just Missouri. It's a $500 million investment in Missouri. Again, 1,500 jobs. I would emphasize there's no state subsidies. The developer's not asking for any money from the state or any local jurisdiction to support this project. It is strictly funded by the takers on this transmission line. In the counties that this project will go through, estimated to be $7.2 million annually in local property tax revenues. In our 39 cities, there's 350, almost 360,000 Missourians that would benefit from this low-cost power. And again, estimated about $32 million in compensation to the local landowners as part of the compensation for acquiring easements to build this facility. In Rolla, specifically, estimated right now $1.24 million in contractual savings, almost $25 million savings over a 25-year term. So we're talking serious money. This is real money. These are savings we're estimated of saving. And again, in most of our communities, these savings be used either for rate relief, rate stabilization, infrastructure investment, or any combination of those things. Any one of those things, I would stress, is a public benefit. if we can invest in our facilities without going to our ratepayers and our customers and asking for more money to invest, it's a public benefit. If we can stabilize rates, it's a public benefit. Everything we're talking about here is a public benefit, no matter how you slice it and dice it. The mayor, when we put this out, he wanted me to give kind of a fair and balanced. Obviously, I'm not impartial. I am an advocate for my consumers. Excuse me. But the mayor asked that I provide some information, some background on why there is opposition to this transmission line. So in Missouri, I think I got this out of the Public Service Commission order, there's 570 landowners affected by this route. Not all of them are opposed. The company has already got 39 easements in hand. That's not a lot, but there are 570 landowners affected. The primary opposition is by private landowners within or adjacent to this route. It's not necessarily ones that the transmission line is coming across their land. They could be adjacent to it and just feel it's going to be an unsightly, and they receive no benefit from it. Again, they believe that this is a private company taking private property for private gain. And again, that is a primary objection. Again, they have thoughts that this could make their land unusable, not just because there's a transmission line there, or there's a few other things about that. But when they build the foundations, they're going to be driving heavy equipment in over the land. They're going to compact the ground, making it harder for years and years for them to potentially till that ground and get that back to normal production. So again, part of the property or the acquiring easements is to compensate these farmers for any land degradation or to restore it back to normal. So that's a real concern, and one, again, I grew up on a family farm. That I understand that you want to keep this agricultural land under production. Big concern getting into the property rights is the company is going to take the property without just and fair compensation. And I would stress here on the other side that it's not a taking; it's a negotiation for a utility easement to allow them to build this facility. They're concerned about being unable to plant crops under the transmission line, move their heavy farm equipment, combines, that kind of stuff on the transmission line. And again, this is going to be a fairly tall facility. It's very low impact to the farm. And again, this is really a land rights issue. So the last bullet point is access to eminent domain is typically reserved for public benefit projects, and they feel this is a private company, private gain, those kinds of things. So they don't feel that eminent domain should be used in this situation. Any questions on any of those?
Rodney, I got two.
Sure.
The House bill itself, it's specifically limited to the Grain Belt project, right? And it's just removing that ability to use eminent domain?
It does not use Grain Belt. It was very narrowly focused, and I have a slide coming up with the entire language of the agreed to.
Okay.
But it does have a very narrow focus in specifically targeting this project. Yes,
Ronnie, what's the size of the transmission line that's going to go up there? I mean, is it comparable to some of the other transmission lines that we see going across the property?
I believe it's 700 kV, meaning it's very high voltage. What I've been told is the footprint for the towers is smaller. So if you looked at the Ameren's line, the 138 might be more comparable to one of those. They've got designs for monopole construction, lattice tower, several different ones, but what I've been told is the footprint is going to be smaller for this facility than some of the lower voltage lines.
Okay.
And I'll have a little more information. Did you have another question?
Yeah, where is this, what is this, session's almost over up there, so what is the status of this bill?
I'm going to give you that right at the end. So PS, let's talk a little bit about, before I want to hit that, the project received a certificate of convenience and necessary just like any other utility in the state. Grain Belt went through a 5-year process. They're just like Ameren, KCP&L, anyone that wants to operate as a utility within the state. And I want to stress they're just like Ameren. Once they want a license to operate, they're a public utility, And again, typically, public utilities as defined by the state and fall under the jurisdiction of the Public Service Commission are really investor-owned private utilities operating under that jurisdiction. Rolla we are a public utility, but we're truly a public utility in the fact that the public owns us. These are private companies doing business that fall under the jurisdiction of the Public Service Commission, whose job is to regulate them. And again, in the beginning, when this project was conceived and brought to the Public Service Commission in 2014, there was no public benefit or even perceived public benefit for the state because there was no drop-off point in Missouri. Missouri was not getting anything. After they failed on their first attempt, we're very straightforward. They approached all the utilities in the state. The municipal utilities are the ones that signed on to their project, negotiated this drop-off of power in the state of Missouri to provide a public benefit, a real benefit for us, but a benefit for the company as well. In essence, the proponents of House Bill 1062 and the landowners, they haven't fully accepted that change, that the project has changed over the course of the last 5 years. There is now a public benefit. Frankly, it's a point where they just don't want this facility in their backyard. So let's talk about PSC consideration. So again, there has been 5 years of hearings. I think this has gone to the Public Service Commission 3 times. Also ended up at the Supreme Court just recently last year. They've had lots of local hearings in the local communities affected by this project, also in Jefferson City, which I attended a few of those. There's a comprehensive 54-page report and order. I do have a copy of that, but if you do want to get a copy of it, I've got the link here where you can go to EFIS, which is the Electronic Document Center for Public Service Commission, enter the case number, and you can see item number 758. That's how many documents are part of their casework. This is, like I said, they have had a very comprehensive analysis of this issue, and that project was determined to be in the public interest in March of this year. PSC also, again, their concern for the landowners was substantial. In the order, and I'm quoting right out of the order, negative impacts of the project on the land and landowners are mitigated by landowner protocols. How the company will interact with the landowners as they negotiate easements, and I've read that. Superior compensation payments, binding arbitration, a decommissioning fund. So if this facility is, in 20 years, it's no longer valid, they're required to create a decommissioning fund to make sure this facility is removed, the farmland restored back to its original condition. There's agriculture impact protocols to avoid these negative agricultural impacts. And the last bullet I have is no more than 9 acres of land in Missouri will be taken out of production. And again, that's right out of the PSC's order. This is not, well, we may not have to do this. This is right in the order that says this is what the Grain Belt Express project will do. So in the 200-plus mile stretch of transmission line from one side of Missouri to the other, only 9 acres of agricultural land will be taken out of production.
Rodney, where did they get the figures in on the savings and stuff like that?
That was analysis done by Missouri Public Utility Alliance in our power pool. And what we're doing, what we are in essence doing, our long-term plan is we have an expiring coal contract of power we purchase out of Illinois. That contract is expiring. We can replace that power with lower cost wind power and natural gas facilities that we already have access to, and that's how we reduce our.
What if the wind quits blowing?
What's that?
What if the wind quits blowing?
That's why we have the natural gas facilities to do the backup. You can't. You've got to rely on both. You can't always rely on just wind alone, but we've already committed for also natural gas facilities, and that combination of the two will. Okay.
Rodney, that coal plant, is that an independent, or did the pool
that
co-own
is,
that?
We do not own that facility. It's just a power purchase agreement with a company called Dynegy in Illinois, and that power comes out of several coal facilities that they own in Illinois.
Hold on, Ann?
I found it, I was looking at some of this online, and I found it interesting with regard to the land, negative impacts on land. They were going to try as much as possible to run these lines along county roads or access roads, also avoid, cutting through properties if at all possible, to stay as,
That
on
was
property lines and avoid as much as possible residential encumbrance, with
at
these
the
two.
hearing I was at last week. That was one of the things that came up, and that is their goal, to do that, run against county roads, trying not to bisect as much land as they can. That was part of the siting considerations of the transmission line. Obviously, you can't do that in all situations, but there was great efforts and several adjustments. And again, if you read in the order, it talks about the several adjustments that were made to the route to address some landowner concerns. And real quickly, there's a quote on page 47 of the report, talks about the movement toward renewable energy, in particular wind, and it ends with saying that it is, and is therefore in the public interest. So there is a benefit. The Public Service Commission found there is a public benefit to the state of Missouri for this project. All right, so let's talk a little bit about House Bill 1062 was introduced by Representative Hansen out of District 40. He's up, I believe, in the Rawls County, Monroe County area. This is the actual text of the perfected language. So private entities shall not have the power of eminent domain. And basically, again, it's focused on the land rights issues. So private entities cannot have eminent domain for the purpose of constructing above-ground merchant lines. Defines merchant line as a high-voltage DC transmission line, which does not provide for substations every 50 miles, which is not, again, it's counter to why companies build DC lines. DC lines are most efficient for transporting very long distances. Yeah. You see these up in Dakotas, Minnesota, where we're transporting hundreds of miles. That's the most efficient way to do it. And then it also defines what a private entity is, and again, it excludes anyone who's got a CCN from the Public Service Commission. So there, even though the Public Service Commission has defined this company, when they pass an order, they define them as a public utility. They're wiping that status out. So again, to the mayor's comments, where's this bill at? It passed out of the House on April 18th by a very wide margin, 115 to 35. There was a Senate Commerce Committee hearing on May 1st. That was last Wednesday. We had several of the utility leaders, including the mayor from Herman, the mayor from Lamar were there and spoke in opposition to the bill, as well as many of us in the utility industry for the municipal sector. That Senate Commerce Committee was going to vote last Thursday. Because of some other scheduling conflicts, they delayed the vote until today. About 3 o'clock, I got the word that it did pass out of the Senate Commerce Committee this afternoon with a 6-5 vote. And so what that's telling us is this is not as much of a slam dunk in the Senate as it was in the House. It has much more support on the Senate side than it did in the House side. As of now, today, I haven't heard if it's scheduled for its next action, whether that it will sit a little bit, but so I'll be monitoring to see, and certainly our staff at MPUA is monitoring where this bill, what's the next action will be taken.
Rodney, what are if it passed out of it's out of the House, it went to the Senate committee, what are the next couple of steps? Senate floor?
I think
it would go to the Senate floor next.
Senate floor next.
And if the Senate is able to pass a bill, then it would go into a joint committee. So those are the next two steps.
And there's, and as of today, there's 2 weeks left in the session. I think they have action to take.
This vote suggests this has a pretty uphill fight.
I would say that, looking at this, it's not likely to go anywhere in and of itself, but as you get toward the last 2 weeks of the session, you have to watch to make sure it doesn't become an amendment on some other large.
And that's we expect there could be a lot of activity the next 2 weeks, whether it be amended onto other bills that are moving if this one's not moving. So that's kind of the end of the show. Obviously, again, I'm quite an advocate for my customers, but I'd be happy to take any questions.
I just want to say first, thank you for following this so closely. I think for all of us, and for all citizens and customers, this is a big deal, and appreciate you going to Jefferson City and making the effort to do that.
Yeah.
I did have 3 quick questions otherwise. If this bill were to pass, is there any then, is it impossible to find discretion that this could be found in the public interest, or is it written in such a way, even if it were to be found in public interest, it can't be utilized?
No, I think there's a lot of if this does pass, again, according to the council that worked with us and worked with us and Public Service Commission as this worked through its way through. She's a former PSC attorney. She's very familiar with the law, and she thinks that there's plenty of other options. But again, every time something like this comes up, it's a delay, and again, it's going to be the Zenvenergy, who is the successor to Cleanline Energy in this project. Do they want to fight it? How will it keep going? So, and we hope so.
Right.
We do hope so.
And so without the eminent domain power, they could still go to landowners and offer them something, but it would be unlikely they could get every one of the 570 owners on board.
Ultimately, as we are a public utility. We have eminent domain. The city of Rolla has eminent domain power. I will tell you, as the utility director, that is the last thing we ever want to see is an eminent domain proceeding going after. And I would assume, from the city's perspective, it's also the same. You always start with negotiations, and again, I think the goal is to meet that. But look at Highway 72. When you say you're going to construct that road, it has a certain path. If you have one person that says no, that's why ultimately you have that power of eminent domain is to get. Yes, sir.
Well, I think what you're suggesting, though, is a little bit different than this, in that Highway 72 was a public body creating a public road. This is, a private company installing transmission lines for their benefit, which may trickle down to us. As a citizen of Rolla, it sounds great, but I can certainly understand why many people would be concerned with having high-power transmission lines run through their yard and basically told to shove it, take it, because it benefits everybody else.
And we do understand that, and we've been very sensitive to the landowners along the way as well. So it is a benefit for our community. We understand that, but we also understand we've got a lot of landowners and county commissions and other people in the route that would prefer this to be somewhere else.
Well, and what is the precedent this sets? If we say to landowners, we're going to allow private industry to take your land or construct power lines through your land, and there's nothing you can do about it.
And again, I would stress that the people or the developer behind this project is acting, and they're acting under the same operating rules that Ameren, Kansas City Power and Light, any other utility and public utility in the state of Missouri has to follow.
But their interest is not what the public utilities is. Their interest is to make money, correct?
Yeah, they are all of the investor-owned utilities in the state are operating in a rate of return and for a profit.
And I think that creates the distinction here. Whereas RMU is not interested in turning a profit. They're doing things truly for the greater good. This power company is not doing things for the greater good. That may be an effect of it. They're doing it for their bottom line.
I'm not.
And paying for it on the backs of the people who don't want to sell their land or don't want high-power transmission lines running through their backyard.
Right, and I think that was the deliberation the Public Service Commission had, was to try and again, if you read the order, it talks about their deliberative process is trying to find the balance between the public interest of citizens in Rolla, citizens Kirkwood, citizens in Lebanon, Waynesville, and St. James against the landowners' concerns and landowner rights. And again, in the end, that's how the Public Service Commission weighed in, was they did determine it was a public benefit for the state of Missouri and ruled in favor of the project.
Rodney, is the owner a power company or just a transmission company?
Invenergy, and I didn't bring any information on them. So this was originally developed by a company called Cleanline Energy. They had, I think, about 6 projects. I think this might be the only one that's still standing, so to speak.
Let me get to my question.
But
if they're just a transmission company,
Invenergy, who has bought the rights to this project now, not only have developed transmission lines, they've developed wind farms and quite a few other.
Let me get to my question. If they're just a transmission company, assume that's the case, and not a power company, does the PSC regulate their return on investment as like a utility company being a power generator?
I believe in this case is FERC will have jurisdiction over this facility.
Rates.
I
guess I'm following up on Matt's point. I think what you're trying to tell us is they're utility-like. I'm just trying to feel how utility-like are they? They got the world by you-know-whats, and they're going to charge whatever? Or somebody is going to regulate their return on investment like a power generator?
I think in this particular case, it is the merchant line, and the folks that operate on that it's a free market, which a lot of the wholesale markets are for transmission rates.
So
whatever
they can get, they'll get.
I'm going to try. I'll get that answer for you because I don't want to say one thing. Or
I think for me, it's
wrong.
important.
Yeah. No,
I mean, if you're going to pawn this off as utility-like, then that's one thing. If it's whatever the market will bear, hell, these savings could be gone.
I do know that the municipals in the state are getting, and I think even the order says it, a first mover status, meaning we're getting a very good deal on this project.
Teaser rates, maybe.
I like first mover rate, but I understand that.
Okay. You see where I'm driving, though.
Right.
What I'm after is this. If you're saying that this is utility-like, then are they going to be regulated rate-wise like utility? That's what I want to know.
And I'll have to get that information.
Okay, thank you.
So with that information, we had a meeting on Friday, our conference call on Friday. Many of our communities were trying to get, again, with only 2 weeks of the session left, trying to get resolutions passed in our communities if there was support for it, opposing House Bill 1062 and supporting the Greenbelt Express project on behalf of our citizens and ratepayers and communities. And I think we've prepared a draft resolution that's in your packet.
Any other questions before we read the resolution?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
What has our representative and senator, where do they stand on these votes?
As of this morning, I contacted Senator Brown's office. He had not gotten into the office yet, and so I have not got a full read on him, but I don't think he has decided one way or the other at this point in time.
I talked to Don Mayhew, and his answer was vague, but I think he voted against it.
Representative Mayhew did vote for it.
For it, I'm sorry.
He did vote for it, but we had a lot of conversations with him ahead of time. His vote was not unexpected, based on how the House was moving in the direction of passing the bill. But again, I'm not going to speak for Senator Brown. I don't know where he's at completely at that. I expect the city administrator from Waynesville, myself, and the city administrator or utility director from St. James will probably have to try and have a conversation with him in the next few weeks, which we are running out of time.
Can you read the resolution, please?
A resolution opposing House Bill 1062 and in support of the Greenbelt Express Transmission Line Project.
Resolution passed.
Second.
Motion made in second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
That's 2 votes. Normally, we don't get close enough to these mics. Lee, you broke that mold. Are there any no's?
No.
No.
Let the record show 2 no's.
And I will provide that information. Thank you very much for your time and
Moving on to-
monitoring this subject.
Thanks, Rodney. I appreciate the fair and balance.
I'm trying to do my best. I hope I succeeded.
Claims and/or fiscal transactions. We have one, an ordinance to approve some gap financing.
Good evening. In your packet tonight is a proposal for a 1 to 2 year gap financing. Piper Jaffray helped the city of Rolla prepare the RFP that is in your packet. If you've read your packet, you can tell it's a very lengthy RFP. We received 3 individual bids for this, and this is for the Vichy Road and Southeast Wastewater Treatment Plant. This is the project that Steve Hargis has been, sending before council, doing the public hearings and things like that. We are estimating that we would need a little bit less than 1.5 million to bridge the gap. What we are waiting for is we want to keep the project moving. We want to keep the professional services coming, the specs continuing, the work so it continues, so that when the DNR project is completed and the state revolving fund financing takes place, we will roll this money into that loan, which has already been approved by the voters and by city council, and this is just to get us in the interim of that. So if you don't have any questions, I am recommending that Town and Country Bank be awarded the bid. That is at 2.13%. And tonight, I'm also asking for a first and final reading because the bids are only good until May the 12th. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
No question, Stephanie. You must have done a better job than the rest of them.
Everything to Stephanie.
First reading, please.
An ordinance authorizing the issuance of $1,520,000 principal amount of sewer system revenue bonds, Series 2019, of the City of Rolla, Missouri, for the purpose of providing funds to pay a portion of the cost of the city's engineering and design costs for the Vichy Road and Southeast wastewater treatment plant improvements, and to pay the costs of issuance of said bonds, prescribing the form and details of said bonds, and the covenants and agreements made by the city to facilitate and protect the payment thereof, providing for the collection, segregation, and application of the revenues of the sewage system of the city for the purpose of paying the cost of operation and maintenance of said system, paying the principal of and interest on said bonds, and providing reasonable and adequate reserve funds, and authorizing the city to sell such bonds to Town and Country Bank.
Is there a motion to suspend the rules and have the second reading?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Go ahead, say it again.
An ordinance authorizing the issuance of $1,520,000 principal amount of sewerage system revenue bonds, Series 2019, of the City of Rolla, Missouri, for the purpose of providing funds to pay a portion of the cost of the city's engineering and design costs for the Vichy Road and Southeast wastewater treatment plant improvements, and to pay the cost of issuance of said bonds, prescribing the form and details of said bonds, and the covenants and agreements made by the city to facilitate and protect the payment thereof, providing for the collection, segregation, and application of the revenues of the sewage system of the city for the purpose of paying the cost of operation and maintenance of said system, paying the principal of and interest on said bonds, and providing reasonable and adequate reserve funds, and authorizing the city to sell such bonds to Town and Country Bank.
Post ordinance passed.
Second.
Motion made and second. Roll call vote.
Crow,
Yes.
Schott,
Yes.
Reuter,
Yes.
Schneider.
Yes.
Wait a minute, I said Reuter,
No.
Oh,
not Roder.
I was waiting for that. Yes. We'll get it figured out one day.
Excuse me. Jones,
Yes.
Murphy,
Yes.
Henry,
Yes.
Williams,
Yes.
Mush,
Yes.
Roder,
Yes.
Everly,
Yes.
Allen,
Yes.
12 A's.
Moving on to citizen communication. Is there anyone that would like to speak to city council? Yes, sir. If you can, please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Russell Adams. I live at 13810 County Road 448, St. James, Missouri. I'm here to put my glasses on. I'm here to address the council with regard to the agricultural lease at the Rolla National Airport. I use this to produce hay and graze cows. I paid my annual rent on March 7th, 2019, and I'm actively using the land at this time in my farming operations. I recently met with the city administrator, Mr. Butts, regarding planned action by the city of Rolla regarding the ag lease. I was informed that Mr. Butts plans on requesting proposals for farming operations on the airport. Prior to submittal of these proposals, he plans to conduct tours of the hay fields and the pastures for any interested parties so that they may see the current operations. The submitted proposals should include a description of the planned farm operations by the prospective bidders the amount of annual rent to be paid to the city, and a bid on my personal property, which will be observed during the tours. He has informed me that I have the right to not accept the personal property bids. Mr. Butts would like this procedure to be completed late this summer or early in the fall. I informed Mr. Butts during this meeting that I objected to his plans and that I did not want my operations to be disrupted in this manner. I was told that I had no say in this matter and that my only recourse was to request the Rolla City Council to end the lease prematurely and to expect no refund of rents paid on the remaining part of the current term of the lease. I would like to ask the council if there has been input from an attorney on the legality of this action. My limited research indicates that I have a right to be left alone, with an exception allowed by terms described in the lease executed by the Rolla City Council and myself.
Sir, I couldn't hear all of it well, but I'm not so sure I understood it well enough. What are you objecting to?
I'm objecting to bringing outside people onto the lease land to look at the operation in order that they can have a reason or base their bid on what they see.
Okay, maybe I'm missing a boat here. We're talking about all the fields at the airport.
Correct.
So somebody could get out of their car on the road, somebody could stand on the runway and look at the land? Or
Yeah, they could do that now. The discussion was, suggestion was, we've got lots of people who are interested in bidding on this, the current lease.
And we should go out to bid, there's no doubt there.
Yeah, and the current lease ends in, March of 2020?
Yes.
Yeah. And so prior to that, many months prior to that, there's going to be lots of people wanting to see what the operation is. I had a meeting with Russ and suggested that we schedule a Saturday morning to invite people in.
Maybe I'm not understanding farming, but what's the operation? We cut grass and we bale it as hay?
Well, no, there's both hay and there's cattle, and so where the ponds are, where the water lines are, where the fence lines are, those kinds of things.
Okay, so you're objecting to somebody walking on the property while your lease is still in effect?
Yes.
That's what you're,
Outside people.
okay.
Is the concern that folks would like kind of trade secret type thing? Like they might see how many cattle you have and what you're doing, and that might give them an extra ability?
Well, when I first rented it, I bought insurance. And J.D. Roach said the previous guy somebody stole a tractor, somebody stole a big bunch of stocker cattle. Okay, all my equipment is not in public view. I mean, I have to be out there to mow, but it's up. It's in the woods, it's behind cedar trees, it's not visible. That's my security. In addition, I have cattle that are calving, and the calves lay down in tall grass. You drive through there, you're gonna run over a calf. So now, it's my understanding that if a person leases property, then they get certain rights. And one of those is to control the access.
Yeah, that's
Now,
not,
if
the
there's-
lease
if-
could be written differently than that.
Well,
The lease could allow.
I'm gonna say that it depends on the terms of the lease.
Okay, so stop right there. What are the terms of the lease?
I mean, the lease still recognizes that the city owns this property and is operating it as an airport, so I haven't asked Lance to look at the feasibility of us taking on a controlled weekend, folks on a tour of the property. We're happy to do that.
Okay, so we can do that.
Yeah.
The lease is up when?
March 2020.
Okay,
I paid the rent to March 2020.
so certainly it's reasonable to expect that if we're gonna go to bid, somebody's gonna have access to this property, so.
No.
So you're not expecting us, when we go to bid, to let people look at our land?
No, I'm gonna restrict that.
Okay.
Are there any circumstances that you would feel comfortable if there was a group organized with certain folks there? Is there any circumstances under which you'd feel comfortable letting folks see it? I guess that'd be my question.
Not that I can think of.
Okay.
I mean, in addition, he wants them to look at my personal property and bid on it.
Well, that was
I have the right
an
to-
offer for you. I wasn't suggesting, I was saying if you have personal property that you want to dispose of and you'd like us to include that in it with your approval, we're happy to put that out in the request for
Well, that's not what
proposals.
it said.
Yes, it was.
I mean, I don't want that.
Then that's your call, it's your personal property. It was an offer I made.
Okay, so we need to check the lease to see if we have rights to go on the property. Short of that, I assume we let the lease expire, do nothing while the lease is expired, have everybody go out and look at it and go to bid.
Yeah, we really like to do it several months prior to that, because people need to be gearing up for that spring harvest and the work. So if we can't get on the property and we don't have a legal right to get on our property, then we won't. We're going to map it, and we've been doing that this summer, so we can get the information. I just thought people would be interested in being able to see it with Mr. Adams' participation in looking at these properties.
Well, before I leased it, I talked to Mr. Merle Strauss, and he was very adamant, saying that I couldn't do anything because the previous renter had the right to renew for 5 years, and he had not said that he was not going to do that. And finally, he wrote a letter to the previous renter was Don Bennett. He wrote a letter, are you going to renew it for 5 years? And he responded, no. So then Merle told me that. And I said, well, can I walk over the land? Well, I'll have to find out. He called Don Bennett and said, I have a guy that's interested in it. You still have the lease until the end of December. Can you walk over it? And he responded, yes. And I did. And then it took 3 months till March, 2.5 months, to get the lease worked out.
It's basically what we're suggesting here, but
And
we will look
then
at it further.
they asked for proposals, I submitted a proposal, and they awarded it to me.
Yeah.
And that was after the lease was over with.
Now, if we're just looking at our property and we tell you that we're not going to look at your property, you're not going to have people on your property, you're perfectly okay with us bringing vetted by our administration bidders to come on and look at our property,
Hold on,
right?
let me clarify. When you say ours and theirs,
Right.
does he have property or we keep talking about our property?
It's all our property.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
So his property is referring to as, I think it's the
Personal
cattle.
property.
Cattle or tractors. or
Hold on,
things
time out. It's our property.
Yeah.
The
What
real
he-
estate.
real estate.
Let's use the word.
Right.
Yeah, let's-
What he doesn't want to see, his property, I assume, is the cows and the tractors.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes, and,
Okay.
you drive through the fields, you're gonna leave ruts.
Okay, I just want to clarify. Go ahead with your question.
So then my question, I guess, is I can understand if you didn't want a whole bunch of willy-nilly people out there looking at things that they shouldn't look at. But if we have some bidders that we believe are viable bidders that we've vetted, that aren't the kind of people that are looking to come take your stuff or move your stuff around just to look at the property, certainly you wouldn't have any problem with bidders coming and looking at the property.
Well, I would question your method of vetting.
Well, what if I told you it was great?
What's that?
What if I told you it was great?
I would tell you it's not great.
This
Well-
is all settled by the contract, right?
Yeah.
Why, can we get the contract and see what that says, and then we'll have a good answer for
Sir,
you one way or
your
the other.
points are duly noted. And we hope you're going to continue, and you've got the highest bid, especially after this. Will you look at that? Thank you. Any other citizens? Mr. Myers, please state your name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is Jamie Myers. I live at 11876 County Road 3000. Also run an agency here in town called Prevention Consultants in Missouri. I just came tonight to listen, but I feel like I need to share something, so I took some notes while I was listening because I think there were some inaccuracies shared. But I'm not going to address those now because those I'm sure will come up later. But what I do want to say is we all have our individual views about marijuana use and opinions about this new Missouri law. And regardless of our differences, I hope you can agree that the use of THC in any form by youth is dangerous, and preventing youth use should be a priority. With this in mind, there are two risk factors that can lead to increased youth use, and these are supported by many years of research. I hope you will consider these factors as you make decisions about how the new law is implemented in our community. The first risk factor to consider is youth access. How accessible substances are to youth will affect youth use. This includes availability of the substance, proximity to the substance, and restrictions placed on youth access to substances. The 100-foot buffer approved by voters as part of the Missouri law is one example of this. And frankly, I believe that was one of the reasons the law passed, was because there was the 1,000-foot buffer. A second risk factor for youth substance use is perception of risk. If a young person perceives or believes there's little to no risk in using a substance, he or she is more likely to use the substance. Kids are listening and they're watching. How we talk about substances, how we act when discussing substances, and the policy developed will affect kids' perceptions about these substances. There are other important risk factors, including parents and what they say to their kids, despite what Mr. Veets said tonight. That was very disturbing to me. I hope you will keep these two risk factors that I've talked about in mind, as you consider the decisions you make about the implementation of the new law in our community. As I heard recently, elections have consequences. This is very true. It's also true that decisions have consequences. I hope you keep in mind how the decisions you make affect the youth in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.
Rodney?
I haven't answered your question.
I thought I'd keep you up all night.
Almost did.
I pulled out the PSC order. There are actually several sections on it. Testimony from Mr. Skelly, who was with Grain Belt, and the transcript and some FERC stuff. But in general, what they're saying is Grain Belt would offer transmission service through an open access transmission tariff, also called an OAT, to be filed and subject to jurisdiction of FERC under the Power Act and FERC regulations. Another section, rate regulated by FERC and not the Commission, so it's federally regulated. They must, under FERC requirements, Grain Belt must broadly solicit interest in the project. Rates negotiated must be just and reasonable without undue discrimination or preference, and not impair regional reliability and operational efficiency. And then finally, FERC has specifically found on Grain Belt's process to select customers and allocate capacity to be not unduly discriminatory. So those are.
So it's utility-like?
So it's utility-like, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other citizen communication? Moving on to Mayor or City Council comments. First item, with your consent, I would like to appoint Jody Eberly as the City Council Planning and Zoning Representative. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Now, a motion made and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? With your consent, I would like to appoint 3 people to the Finance Audit Committee. John Matt and, can't read my own writing, David. Right? Yes.
Sure.
You said yes. I'm sorry, yeah. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? With your consent, I would like to appoint Jimmy Dale, Jacob, and Daniel to the Environmental Services Committee.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made in second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, back to our marijuana issue. So, let me ask, Daniel, do you have anything you want to add yet tonight before I ask council to take some steps?
No, I do want to add that I think that if the council decides to go through with this, that we want to do this obviously the most legal and quickest way possible, because I believe that every day that we wait, we do have more and more people that are having to deal with this issue. And this issue affects folks that don't necessarily go to all these meetings that we talk about. It affects the thousands of people out there that happen to be using recreational cannabis in their respective lives. So I do think that there is emergency, not emergency, I think there's immediacy and urgency to this issue.
Okay, Jimmy Dale?
I am taking exception to Daniel over there, and he knows it. Recreational marijuana should not be allowed in the city of Rolla. If you want to have medical marijuana, I can go along with that, but I am opposed to any and all drugs being criminalized, or not criminalized here in Rolla, Missouri, or anywhere else, be honest with you. I have seen a lot of young kids over the years that started from the beginning, started with marijuana, and it progressed to other stuff. And by the time they were 21, 22 years old, they looked like they was about 60 or 70. And it's wrong if we put this stuff out there where these kids can get it. If the medical part of it, I can understand. But it's going to have to be really regulated in order for me not to go against it too. I have never done drugs in my life. I've never taken a puff off of a marijuana cigarette. I have been around drugs quite a bit. I tended bar for 7 years. I run around with guys when I was younger that was in the band, and they all used. Some of them used the hard stuff. I never partake. I did drink, but I quit that too because it made me stupid. And so, and I don't advocate anybody to drink right now, because if they drink and drive, they're hurting not only themselves but everybody else too. I will have to go against, and I can't believe that it's an emergency to pass recreational marijuana. There's no way it can be an emergency. I'll just stop there.
Jimmy, are you under the impression that we're trying to make it legal? I still want it to be a crime with a fine, with much, with a lot of weight on that. I'm not trying to legalize anything. What I want to stop doing is making people go to jail for it. I just don't think that that's the way to go.
Daniel, you break the law, you pay the price.
I agree.
That's what it boils down to, sir.
It's not for everybody, Jimmy, but it's not a crime.
And until the law is changed, then it's going to have to be a statewide law. Probably it's going to have to make the change.
We can change the law here.
Is changed, you break the law, you can go to jail for it. I'm not saying that you will, but you can.
Have you ever seen a broken ordinance before this? Have you ever seen an ordinance that didn't work before this one? That's what this is. This is a broken ordinance that over-penalizes the people in our community, over-penalizes. I'm not about to stop penalizing people for cannabis, but what we need to stop doing is ruining lives, educations, and futures with jobs.
Then let me tell you what. If you're going to do the crime, pay the price, son.
But you don't need to do the time. I'm all about pay the price, don't do the time. If you want to do the crime, pay the price. You don't have to go to jail.
Well, that's what the law says now. and
We'll
what the
change it.
prosecutor said.
We'll change it across the United States. That's what we're doing currently. You're either on the bus or you're off it.
You can sit there and preach to me all day. I'm going to vote against it. You
I
can vote
understand.
for it. I'll vote against it. That's the way it stands.
David?
I just wanted to make a mention, because it is something that's accepted in our society, that alcohol is a very addictive drug, actually. It is considered a drug, I believe, and it's very addictive, and it has very bad consequences. So I just want to mention that that's something that we allow in our communities. We allow bars and whatever, and we need to maybe also think about that when we think about something that actually is being used as medicine, which alcohol normally isn't. But the other thing I wanted to mention, because I know we've talked about access and youth, and I agree with our public Jamie Myers public comment, that we do have to watch out for our youth access. But I do think that the like Jack Cardetti explained, the card system, I mean, nobody needs a card to go get alcohol, but it seems easier to get alcohol than it would be to get than medical marijuana. And the other thing I wanted to mention, which comes up a lot, is that I think Jimmy Dale brought it up, and I think a lot of people do think about this, is that marijuana could be a gateway drug. I guess for me, I feel like almost anything, I mean, Tylenol could be a gateway drug if you had to go get it from a heroin dealer. If you have to get something from somebody who's dealing something that's horrible, you know, and you can't access it at a medical dispensary, yes, it is a gateway drug. So I just wanted to mention that, because I think having to go to a certain place to get something that is something important for you, like medical marijuana.
Yeah, but David, just let's keep these things separate. We're not talking about medical marijuana.
Okay.
So go on with it. Keep.
Okay, but my main point was something like Tylenol could be a gateway drug if you had to get it from someone who was dealing heroin. That was the end of my comment.
Matthew?
I'm just curious because there was the conversation about whether or not our law enforcement, our Rolla Police Department would cooperate with decriminalization of marijuana. And it seems like, there could be, the law of unintended consequences. By making or decriminalizing it, do we run the potential of making it worse? In other words, our law enforcement starts forwarding all these things to Mr. Fox's office, and now they're charged with misdemeanors or whatever the case may be. So I think that's something I would like to know, like, what is our law enforcement's response to that? Would they follow a directive that said, you shall not send these to Mr. Fox's office, or are they free to disregard that? Because if they're free to disregard it, then we may actually make things worse.
And to add to that, I'm sorry, I do need to interject. Mr. Crowell will probably understand this. There's a fundamental disconnect, I think, in the way that we're looking at this. You can order that law enforcement, I should say the Rolla Police Department, direct these to the municipal prosecuting attorney. But the municipal prosecuting attorney is an elected official, and this body doesn't have any authority to tell him what he can or can't do. State versus Wren says that prosecuting attorney has absolute authority to decide what charges to file and what charges not to file. I think you need to just keep in mind, just looking at the politics of what we're talking about right now, your elected city prosecutor is also an assistant prosecuting attorney for Phelps County. And so if he receives all of the reports from the police department and he elects to not file them in municipality and send them all over to state court, he has the ability to do that. My point to Alderman Jones, or Councilman Jones, before was, I just don't want anybody to think that they're providing protection when they're not, because there are independent factors for the prosecuting attorneys to just make decisions that are outside of the purview of this council. So just keep that in mind.
With that being said, I believe it's also important to voice the concerns of our citizens, and that's what I'm hearing, is that we need to change this.
Well,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, but Mr. Fox is a resident of the city of Rolla. I say we have him come before us and state his intentions.
Let me propose this. First of all, there's more that we don't know than we do know. And I, for one, was not going to invest staff time unless this council decides that they want to move forward. The likely course, if you want us to move forward, is to first conduct the legal review. What is it that we could do? I respect the person that came and speak, but at the end of the day, he's not representing the interest of Rolla. So we do have to have local legal people weigh in on what we can do or not do. I think we have to have a public education process so that all parts of the issue can bring forth facts, data, studies, whatever they want, pro, con, medical, law enforcement, whatever. I think the citizens need to have an understanding of all sides to the issue. I think we have to have a public hearing for the citizens to weigh in on this. And if it goes to the final gate, we write an ordinance, come back to you and say, what do you want to do? So I don't want to see us go down all that path if you as a body is not committed to doing that.
Based on what Lance has said, I think we're spinning our wheels. I would rather not waste a bunch of time on this, personally. I mean, if we were further down the road or if the laws were changed at the state level, then it would make more sense, but
Okay, so why don't we do this by a show of hands? Because we got a lot of other stuff here. Does council want to advance the issue through this gated set of decision-making? That's a yes or a no. So all those in favor of wanting us, staff, to go down through this process, raise your hand. Okay, majority. So we will start that process.
Thank you.
Let me see, where are we at? Lost track here. Comments for the go to the order? Jimmy Dale?
John, where are we at with Inter-County on their pre-trimming and stuff? They're still tearing up yards and stuff. And they're endangering, they're not cleaning up their mess.
Inter-county or?
Yeah, it's Inter-County.
Okay.
On the right-of-way out is what they're doing, their transmission lines.
Okay, I'm just not aware of that, so I don't know if they're doing it within their easements. I don't know that we have any say over that. They've been granted easements by the property owners for that portion, so I just don't know.
Well, somebody needs to check, we need to check into it or something, because somebody needs to talk with them, because if they're not gonna take care and clean up a mess, when they go through that property and damage the land and not take, and repair it, something's gotta be done. I mean,
I do have a meeting scheduled with them just to meet the new general manager, so I'd be happy to raise that issue, but if you got some locations.
Would you please?
If you have a couple locations, it'd help to know where, because he may not be aware of that, so.
It's on, I think off of Rolla Street out there, and towards the county line out there. A little road somewhere in there, I believe.
Okay. Speaking of messes, those poor people in Elliott, where is that? Steve, John?
Going to the home on Elliott, it's before the municipal court.
Yeah. I can't imagine living next to that house.
Yeah, it's still in court.
They've got an attorney, they can ask for continuance. Last I heard, it's at least 30 days out before something's going to be addressed, so.
Yes, actually, he has stated that he's getting an attorney, but I don't know that.
But what are we dealing with here? This is a rummage sale or somebody just like
No,
hot
it's a
rod stuff?
business. It's a business.
It's a business?
Yeah, basically, he's got a business where he resells stuff that he collects, and he's using it for a staging area.
Does he have a business license?
It's not approved for that area, so, I mean, actually, it's a business, but it's not an approved business.
And he's not doing the sales there.
No, he's not
He
doing the
uses it-
sales there. He's just staging it to move it to other areas.
Yeah.
Yes, it's been going on for quite a few years. He'll clean it up and then come back and it'll be worse.
It's a shame.
I know, but there's really, we've done is everything we can do legally.
So it'll find its way before the judge, and that way we'll let it.
I'd like to tie into this, actually. I know Jimmy Dale and I have discussed a little bit, too. There's a lot of folks, and I know Kathleen, this is especially her time. She's one of the hardest working people in the city with all that she has to do, and she ends up with a lot, what I understand, a lot of repeat customers, as I call it. They wait until they get the paper on their door to mow their lawn. Like, that's their signal, okay, now I'll mow the lawn. They have no penalty because the first warning doesn't carry a monetary penalty. And I'm just wondering if it's something the city should look into. If you're a repeat offender on this, we don't just have Kathleen waste her time and constantly have to go out there to remind you to mow your lawn for free. We should have some penalty if you're a repeat offender. I'm just wondering, is that something we could look at?
I think we could, but I think in state statute, you have to give them the notification.
Even if they've been an offender in the past.
Even if they've been an offender, yes.
Yeah.
I know right now, we've got close to 150 yards posted.
Yes.
You'd be surprised how many liens I sign every week.
I wish we could, do something, so she doesn't have to just keep doing that.
Now, when we do issue the citation, so if somebody doesn't get it done and we issue a citation, then the court can impose second, third, they can take into consideration, but most people know how to work it just to the point to where before it gets to that point, they.
As far as the yards, though, if we give them 5 days, and if they don't mow it, we have companies go in and mow it. They charge administrative fee, and then we follow it.
Do we charge the maximum fee, administration fee / penalty that we could by law?
Yeah, because you can't, the fee has to cover the cost in any processing. You can't extract.
Yeah, I know.
more.
We do a lot of things for $5, though, but are we charging enough?
Yeah, we raised all that just a couple of years ago.
We charge a $100 administration fee plus the mowing of the yard, which is like.
You're expensive, Steve.
Well,
I think you're more like $200.
Well.
The bill is closer to $200, $250.
Yeah, by the time it's done. They don't want to use us for a grass mowing service.
Yeah.
A couple more items. Say,
Maybe we should criminalize.
I haven't written down all the yards that I've seen out there because of the rain that need to be mowed. We still got some derelict houses over there off of Spencer that need to be taken care of.
Again, that's.
Missouri and Spencer, they're on the corner, or Arkansas and Spencer, somewhere in there.
Give us a list.
And I want to know what we're doing with our streets. We're narrowing our damn streets, Mayor, and it needs to quit. We had such an issue with a contractor one time about the width of streets, and it was a big issue.
What are we narrowing? Let's be specific in the essence of time. 6th Street.
Holloway.
Yes, you can't believe how many people have bellyached about what we're doing with 6th Street. We didn't need a sidewalk on that south side.
It's a big one, too. It's about 15 feet.
That is a bunch of crap.
15.
We're wasting money on sidewalks, and the sidewalks are real wide, and people can get by, but cars can't get by.
Oh, come on.
Well, I'm serious. Go over in Holloway.
Come on, all right, hold on. Just, let's get to the point. Are we narrowing the street and why?
Yeah, if we don't have the right-of-way, when we're adding sidewalks, then we are taking that width out of the streets. We've done that. Holloway and 6th are probably the two best examples of that.
Yes.
Holloway is very, very tight. I can't remember the back-to-back.
That does lead directly to a park, though, right?
Well, it was a schools program. It was trying to get the
Yeah.
accessibility for the schools,
It
so.
was from 14th to 18th of this.
Correct.
Narrow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just those.
And it was also to try and discourage trucks from going through that area, but it's narrow, and it is.
It slows traffic down too, which I know there's a lot of speeders that come through that area, and it also encourages bikes and pedestrians, which then are less cars. I think that's all great.
Well, cars can't turn sideways. People can turn sideways. Cars can't turn sideways on the
Two cars
streets.
can pass each other, though, can't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but look, you get a bus over there. You can't go through there.
Ann?
I'm going to change the subject. I just wanted to, I got a call from a previous councilman from Ward 2, and and I talked to Darren about this too, but he was concerned about the prolonged period of time over on Whitney and the streets off of Dover and Fox Creek, the little cul-de-sacs that have been getting water lines put in, but the streets just still torn up. The RMU, according to their contract, they've gone ahead and done the press down with some gravel, because I know we packaged these, Pierce. That was just an RMU meeting, and we just got the bid on Pierce, for patching. But I just wanted to, tell our community people that, we understand, and I appreciate their willingness to be patient and compliant, but this gentleman told me that it was since like January when they first started cutting, to put in. And again, it's rain, there's cold weather, there's a lot of factors that come into that. But if you look up Whitney, it just looks pretty rough. the whole one side of the street, and as far as there's no sidewalks over there, so people on bikes, strollers, walkers, it's not pleasant, it's unsightly, but I just thought we need to give a little shout out to a lot of our people who are dealing with this, so many things that we're doing in town now, so there's so much going on, that it inconveniences people in a number of ways that we don't really think about, because we're usually on the receiving end of, people criticizing or whatever, but I thanked him for calling and letting me know.
But we'll look at the schedule for patching of Whitney and some of those drainage.
The RMU is just about done now. They're over on Wakefield. And I think they should. Yeah, so they'll appreciate that over there.
What is the reasoning for making the sidewalk 15 feet wide on 6th Street?
I don't think the sidewalk's 15 foot wide.
It's a 10 foot.
Okay, a 10-foot wide sidewalk.
Shared use path, bicycle walk.
On that one little section by the lumber company before you get to the tracks up to the Rolla video.
It seems odd that
Family
in front of
video.
it and behind it, there's nothing, but we got a block that's 10 feet.
Yeah.
So it'll be a 10-foot path all the way from Olive, I think we did that section last year, across the railroad tracks, and then the 10-foot will run up all the way to the entrance of Kroger's.
So it's tying it really into the whole trail system, is really what it's about. It's
We're
going
gonna
to eventually get
narrow
over
the
to.
street all the way out, Jimmy Dale.
Benton Square to Kroger.
It's ridiculous, Mayor. We got the whole damn town tore up here and along the highway up there, North 63 up there. Are we doing that too up there?
No, it's MoDOT doing that.
Starting to look like progress.
MoDOT needs to get their heads out of their rear end too.
Okay,
We've
okay.
been wanting that done, though.
All right, any more comments? Good comments for the good of the order. All right, we have 2 items scheduled for closed session, one dealing with union negotiations, the other one real estate. Is there a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Everly,
Yes.
Allen,
Yes.
We're-
Allen,
Defeasance?
I'm sorry,
That means
Murphy,
Yes.
Williams,
Yes.
Schneider,
Yes.
Reuter,
moving.
Yes.
Mush,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Henry,
Yes.
Yes.
Crow, Schott,
Yes.
Roeder,
Yes.
12 A's.
Stretch it.